Please check her bag, Annie said, her voice trembling. Rex wouldn't bite it unless he smelled something inside. Rex would not let go. The dog's teeth held the cream-colored designer bag by its side panel. He was not shaking it. He was not attacking Claudia. He simply held it with a stubborn force that made every security guard in the room hesitate. Claudia Whitmore's face had turned pale beneath her makeup. She gripped the gold chain strap with both hands and pulled hard. "Get him off my bag," she snapped. "Victor, do something." Victor did not move. He had given Rex a command twice already. "Rex, release." The dog had ignored him. That had never happened before. "Besides me, Mrs. Whitmore went into your office too," Annie said, her voice breaking as she looked toward Victor. "I saw her near the door." "I know I did." "Shut your mouth, you filthy little girl." Claudia Whitmore, the billionaire's fiancée, exploded. Her elegant face twisted with anger as she turned toward Victor, who stood silent beside his desk. "You hear that? Now she dares to accuse me. This is what happens when you let uneducated trash into your home." She steals, then screams that someone else did it. "I didn't steal," Annie sobbed. Her hands gripped the front of her apron, still stained with mud and the sticky sap from the bougainvillea vines she had been trimming. "This morning, when I came in to take Rex for his walk, I smelled her perfume in your office. Black rose. The same perfume she's wearing now. The diamond was still there then. I never touched it." "Perfume?" Claudia let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She shook the limited edition handbag in her hand, though Rex's teeth still held fast to the leather. "How convenient. She even has an excuse ready. How professional." Then she looked at Victor again, her voice turning cold. "Tell this awful dog to let go of my bag." Rex only tightened his grip. Claudia's eyes flashed toward the police chief. "Chief, what are you waiting for? This girl has no real background, no family name, nothing but a broken little story and a job she got because an old guard felt sorry for her. She has been here 4 days." Claudia's eyes flashed toward the police chief. She spoke with absolute confidence, as if the verdict had already been decided. 4. She was the only one on that ladder by the balcony outside Victor's office when he went downstairs for 5 minutes. There was dog hair on the velvet tray, which means she used Rex to get close to the diamond. She probably threw the ocean heart down into the grass for some accomplice waiting outside. "Handcuff her so we can still make it to the auction stage on time." But Rex would not release the bag. Claudia turned toward the officer. "Are you going to let that girl direct your investigation now? She has already lied once." "I didn't lie," Annie said, though her voice almost failed her. Claudia looked at her, not angry enough to lose control, but disgusted that the mess existed. "You were the only one near Victor's office," Claudia said. "You had access to the dog. There was dog hair on the velvet tray. And now, suddenly, you want my private belongings searched?" Annie swallowed. Her throat hurt from crying, but she made herself look at Victor. "Sir, Rex isn't biting her. He's biting the bag." "Annie," Victor said, his voice low and cold, "I thought you were a hard-working girl. For 4 days, you barely spoke. You kept your head down and trimmed the plants without complaint. I was going to offer you a permanent position after tonight. Why would you let greed do this to you? That diamond is worth millions. It is the centerpiece of tonight's charity auction. I didn't do it, sir. Please believe me." Annie choked on the words. Helplessness pressed down on her thin shoulders until she could barely stand. The officer stepped closer, and the cold steel of the handcuffs brushed her wrist. Grr. Rex, the German shepherd, still held the bag in his teeth. "Rex," Victor called, forcing his voice to soften. "Good boy, come here to me." But no, the trained dog, usually calm and obedient, suddenly moved like an arrow. He did not lunge at Claudia's body. He did not go for her hands or her legs. He opened his jaws wider and clamped down harder on the luxury handbag she kept pressed against herself as if it were part of her skin. "Oh my God, this beast, let go," Claudia screamed, pulling at the limited edition bag that was worth more than Annie's entire life savings. Rex yanked backward, the leather strained with a sharp ripping sound. Claudia stumbled, nearly losing her balance. Panic flashed across her face. Then anger took over. She lifted one pointed heel, sharp as a blade, and kicked Rex hard in the stomach. Rex cried out in pain. He was forced to release the bag and step back, but he did not lower his head. His eyes stayed locked on Claudia, his low growl returning from deep in his chest. Victor froze. Samuel Brooks, the estate's head security guard, stood near the doorway with one hand raised as if he wanted to step forward but knew the officer would stop him. "Mr. Harrington," Samuel said carefully, "I've known that dog a long time. He doesn't act like this for nothing." Claudia gave a sharp laugh. "Samuel, please, you recommended the girl. Of course you want to believe her." Victor finally took one step toward Rex, heard Rex's low whimper, then watched him hold on until pain forced him back. That was the part Victor could not explain away. "Rex is not some stray dog," Victor said, his voice low but firm. "He is trained, disciplined, and calmer than most people in this room." He paused, looking at the dog as if seeing something painful for the first time. "Until today, I thought loyalty meant obedience, but Rex had disobeyed him to hold on to something." Claudia pulled the bag tight against her chest. "This is humiliating. The press is outside. The donors are arriving. We are already late because of her." Her eyes cut toward Annie. "This girl came into your house 4 days ago, Victor. 4 days. She trims flowers for minimum wage, and you're going to let her accuse me?" Annie dropped her gaze for half a second. The officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, we can secure the dog and continue the search outside." "No," Annie said. Everyone looked at her. "Please," Annie said, softer now. "Just check it. If there's nothing inside, then I'll go with the officer. But if Rex smells what I think he smells, then that bag matters." Claudia's expression changed. Only for a second. A small tightening around the mouth. A flash of fear before anger rushed in to cover it. Victor saw it. The small change in her face had been quick enough for most people to miss. A tightening near the mouth. A flicker in the eyes. Not outrage. Not insult. Fear. Claudia must have felt his attention shift, because she stepped closer to him and lowered her voice. "Victor, look at me. You cannot possibly be taking this seriously." Annie stood frozen, the handcuff still near her wrist. The police chief cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, we need your instruction. This is your property and your residence. If Mrs. Whitmore does not consent, we can proceed differently, but it will take time." "Time?" Claudia snapped. "The auction begins in 20 minutes. There are donors outside, cameras outside. Do you want them filming police officers digging through my purse because some seasonal gardener invented a story?" Samuel Brooks took a slow step forward. "Ma'am, nobody invents a dog's nose." Claudia turned on him. "You should be quiet before you lose your position too." Samuel's face did not change, but Annie saw the hurt land. Victor's eyes moved from Samuel to Rex. The dog stood a few feet from Claudia, breathing hard, his body tense from pain. He had backed away after the kick, but he had not left the bag with his eyes. Not once. "Rex," Victor said softly. The dog's ears shifted toward him, but his stare stayed on Claudia's handbag. Claudia gave a short laugh, the kind meant to make a room feel foolish for doubting her. "Now we're taking instructions from an animal?" "No," Victor said. "I'm taking notice of one." Her smile faded. Annie could barely breathe. The officer beside her had lowered the cuffs slightly, though he had not put them away. That small movement gave her enough strength to stand straighter. Victor looked at Claudia. "Open the bag." The words landed hard. Claudia stared at him. "Excuse me? You heard me." Her eyes filled at once, but the tears came too quickly. "After everything I have stood beside you through, this is how you repay me? You let that girl humiliate me in front of police and staff?" Annie flinched at that girl, but she did not look down this time. Victor's voice stayed controlled. "If there is nothing in your bag, this ends." "No, it doesn't," Claudia said. "Because trust ends, dignity ends. I end." The sentence hung in the air like a threat dressed as heartbreak. The police chief shifted his weight. "Mrs. Whitmore, voluntary consent would make this simpler. I will not be searched like a criminal," Samuel said quietly. "Then stop acting afraid of a search." Claudia's head snapped toward him. "You miserable old man." Victor's jaw tightened. That insult did what Annie's tears had not fully done. It stripped Claudia of the softness she had performed all evening. "Enough," Victor said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Claudia clutched the bag closer to her chest and backed one step toward the hall. "I'm going upstairs. When you come to your senses, Victor, you can find me there." Rex growled. The sound was low, steady, and certain. The female officer near the staircase moved first. "Ma'am, please remain where you are." Claudia turned. "Do not touch me." "No one has touched you," the officer said, "but you are part of an active investigation." Annie saw it too. The shift was small, but it was real. Suspicion had crossed the room. Victor stepped closer. "Claudia, give the officer the bag. You are making the worst mistake of your life." "I already may have." That silenced her. Annie looked at Victor, unsure if he meant Claudia or herself. Claudia's breathing changed. Her hand slid toward the clasp of the bag, then stopped. The police chief noticed. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need a lawyer. You can request counsel," he said. "But right now, we are asking for consent to search property that may contain evidence related to a reported theft." I said no. Victor's voice dropped. "Then I will ask the police to secure it while they obtain the authority they need." Claudia's face went pale again. The bag suddenly looked heavier in her arms. "You have no right," Claudia shrieked, her eyes wide and fixed on the officer. "I demand to speak to my attorney. Without a warrant, nobody touches me. Nobody touches my belongings." Annie had not felt tall all evening. She had felt small enough to disappear into the mud on her apron. But Rex had not let her disappear. The female officer held out her hand. "The bag, ma'am." Claudia looked at Victor one last time. "If you do this, there is no wedding." Victor's eyes hardened, but his voice was not loud. "There cannot be a wedding without truth." A sound came from the hallway. More guests had gathered near the open doors. Someone whispered, "What's in the bag?" Another voice said, "Is that the gardener?" The words reached Annie, but they no longer cut as deeply. For the first time, the question in the room was not only about her. Claudia slowly extended the bag, then suddenly pulled it back. "No, I won't let some little thief turn this around on me." Rex barked once, sharp and commanding. Everyone startled. Victor turned to the police chief. "Take the bag." "Fine. Fine then. You want to see?" Claudia gave a crooked laugh, her fingers trembling as she yanked the zipper open herself. She shoved one hand inside and began pulling things out onto the table. A powder compact, an expensive lipstick, several folded receipts. "Look. Is there anything? Is there anything in here?" At that moment, as the zipper opened wider, a light breeze slipped in from the balcony and carried a heavy scent through the room. Annie went still. Her chest tightened. She drew in one sharp breath and pointed toward the bag. "That's it," she said. "Mr. Harrington. That is the smell. Black rose perfume. This morning when I came into your office, that scent was strong right beside the velvet tray where the diamond was sitting." Claudia's face changed from red fury to a white, bloodless shock. She grabbed for the zipper. "So what if it smells like my perfume? I went into the office looking for you this morning." "But this morning," Victor cut in, his voice cold and stripped of warmth. "You told me you came straight here from the salon. You said you had not been in my office at all." Claudia's mouth opened, but no answer came. Victor did not wait for her to empty the bag on her own. He reached forward and took it from her hands. Claudia screamed and lunged for it, but two officers stepped in and held her back. Victor turned the bag upside down and dumped everything left inside onto the sandalwood table. The bag was empty. The black rose scent spread thickly through the room, but on the table, there was no blue diamond, no ocean heart. Claudia stared at the empty surface, then burst into wild laughter, tears streaking through her makeup. "There's nothing. You see, Victor? There's nothing. That little girl fooled you. You humiliated me because of a black tramp." Annie stared at the bare table, stunned. For one terrible moment, the room tilted beneath her. What if she had been wrong? What if Rex had been wrong? Claudia's victorious face rose before her like a sentence already written, and Annie felt the weight of it hanging over her head. If you feel sorry for Annie in this moment, please like this video to show your support for her. Comment where you are watching from, because someone near you might be watching this story too. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the truth until the end. Annie stared at the empty table until the objects blurred together. Lipstick, compact, receipts, perfume bottle, keys, loose coins, a folded silk handkerchief. Nothing blue, nothing bright, nothing that could save her. Claudia's laughter kept rising, sharp and broken, filling the room with the kind of triumph that did not need proof because it had already found a victim. "Look at her face," Claudia said, pointing at Annie with a shaking hand. "She knows she's finished. She knows she got caught lying." "I didn't lie," Annie whispered, but even she could hear how small it sounded now. The police chief looked at Victor. "Mr. Harrington, at this point we need to continue the search of the grounds and secure Miss Carter for questioning." The word secure made Annie's stomach drop. Samuel stepped forward. "Chief, wait a minute." "We have waited," Claudia snapped. "We searched my bag. We humiliated me. There is no diamond. Now do your job." Victor did not answer. His eyes stayed on the table, but Annie could tell he was no longer seeing the scattered things. He was thinking, the empty bag should have cleared Claudia, but it had not cleared the smell. It had not cleared Rex. It had not cleared the look on Claudia's face before the zipper opened. Rex gave a low whine from near the fireplace. Annie turned toward him. The dog was not looking at the table. He was staring at the cream-colored handbag lying limp in Victor's hand. His ears were forward. His body was stiff again. "Sir," Annie said. Victor's eyes moved to her. She pointed at Rex. "He's still looking at the bag." Claudia threw her hands up. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Now what? The dog wants to testify?" Samuel's voice came quiet from the doorway. "Maybe we should listen before somebody else gets kicked for telling the truth." Claudia glared at him, but this time Victor did not let her speak first. "What is it, Rex?" he said. The dog took 2 careful steps forward. His ribs still hurt. Annie could see it in the way he moved. He did not go toward the pile of cosmetics or the receipts. He went to the empty handbag in Victor's hand and nudged the bottom seam with his nose. Once, twice. Then he scratched at the leather. The female officer leaned closer. "May I see that?" Victor handed her the bag. Claudia stiffened. "It's empty. You saw him empty it." The officer turned the bag over in her hands, pressing along the lining. "It may be empty, ma'am. That does not mean it has no compartments." Claudia's face hardened. "That is a designer bag. Don't damage it." The officer looked at her. "If it's evidence." "The bag's feelings are not my concern." A few guests near the archway murmured. Claudia heard them and drew herself taller, trying to put her dignity back on like a coat. The officer ran her fingers along the inside seam. At first, nothing happened. Then her thumb paused near the base. She pressed again. A faint click sounded beneath the leather. Annie stopped breathing. The bottom of the handbag shifted. It was not much, just a thin panel loosening beneath the lining. But in that quiet room it might as well have been a gunshot. Claudia moved fast. Too fast. "That's enough," she said, lunging toward the officer. "You have no right to tear apart my property." The police chief caught her wrist before she reached the bag. "Mrs. Whitmore, step back. Let go of me." Victor looked at the officer. "Open it." The officer slid one gloved finger beneath the loosened panel and lifted. A hidden pocket appeared inside the base of the bag, flat and narrow, built so cleanly that no one would have noticed it during a quick search. Tucked inside was a small velvet pouch, dark blue, no bigger than a folded napkin. Claudia stopped fighting. The room seemed to hear that too. The officer removed the pouch and placed it on the table. She opened the drawstring. The ocean heart rolled gently into her palm. Blue light caught the chandelier and broke across the walls in cold fragments. For a second, the diamond looked unreal, too beautiful to belong to such an ugly moment. Annie's knees weakened. Samuel was beside her before she fell. "I got you, young lady," he whispered. No one spoke. Even the guests at the doorway had gone silent. Victor stared at the diamond, then at Claudia. Something inside his face collapsed, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The man who had trusted contracts, inspections, background checks, and polished manners had been fooled in his own house by the woman wearing his ring. Claudia looked from the pouch to Victor, then to the officers. Her mouth moved before words came. "She put it there." The police chief did not blink. "Who?" Claudia pointed at Annie. "Her. She must have. She knew you would look. She set this up." Annie shook her head slowly. She was too stunned to cry. The female officer held up the bag. "Miss Carter has been standing beside Officer Hayes since before the bag was opened. She never touched it. She had help," Claudia said quickly. "Samuel. The dog. Someone." I don't know. But it wasn't me. Samuel gave a tired sigh. Ma'am, you're running out of people to blame. Victor's voice came low. Claudia. She turned to him at once. Victor, listen to me. I panicked because of how this looked, but I can explain. You said you had not been in my office. I forgot. I was under pressure. You said Annie invented the perfume. She was trying to confuse everyone. You said there was nothing in your bag. I didn't know that pocket was there. Victor looked at the handbag, then back at her. You didn't know your own bag had a hidden compartment? Claudia's face twitched. It was a gift. I don't examine every stitch. The police chief picked up the velvet pouch, and the diamond happened to hide itself inside it. Claudia's eyes filled again, but this time the tears had nowhere to go. I want my lawyer. You'll have one, the chief said. Turn around, please. The words struck the room harder than Annie expected. Claudia looked at Victor, desperate now. You would let them arrest me? After everything? Victor's answer was quiet. After everything, I should have seen you sooner. The officer took Claudia's arm. Claudia jerked back. Don't touch me. Victor, tell them who I am. Victor's eyes went cold. I know who you are now. That was when Claudia stopped pretending. The softness left her face. The wounded fiancé mask fell, and what remained was anger, raw and plain. You think that girl is innocent? She hissed. You think people like her come into houses like this just to trim flowers? She was always looking around, always near the doors, always feeding that dog scraps like she belonged here. Annie flinched, but Samuel's hand steadied her shoulder. Claudia looked at her with open hatred. 4 days in this house, and you managed to turn him against me. No, Annie said, her voice shaking but clearer now. You did that. For the first time all night, Claudia had no answer ready. The police chief nodded to the officer. The handcuffs that had waited near Annie's wrist were brought across the room. Claudia saw them and went still. No, she whispered. The metal closed around her wrists. A sound went through the guests, half gasp, half judgment. Claudia had stood in that room minutes earlier, demanding that Annie be taken away so the auction could begin on time. Now she was the one being led past the flowers, past the crystal lamps, past the people who had admired her dress and believed her voice. As she passed Annie, Claudia leaned close enough to whisper, "This isn't over." Rex growled from Victor's side. Claudia pulled back. The police chief stopped near the doorway and looked at Victor. "We'll need full statements. We'll also need access to your office, the security footage, and anyone who handled that diamond today." Victor nodded. "You'll have everything." The chief glanced at Annie. His voice softened a little. "Miss Carter, you're not under arrest." Annie heard the words, but they did not settle right away. Not under arrest did not mean unhurt. It did not erase the hands that had searched her, the eyes that had judged her, or the way Victor had looked at her when he believed greed had won. Samuel squeezed her shoulder. "Breathe, child." She tried. Victor turned toward her. For the first time that evening, he looked unable to stand inside his own authority. His suit, his house, his name, all of it seemed useless against what had just happened. "Annie," he said. She looked at him, but she did not step closer. He swallowed. "I owe you." "No," she said quietly. Victor stopped. Annie's voice was low, but everyone near them heard it. "Not here, not while everybody is watching." Victor lowered his eyes. "You're right." Rex limped toward Annie. She knelt at once, forgetting the room, forgetting the diamond, forgetting the people who had almost let her be taken away. Rex pressed his head against her chest, and she wrapped both arms around his neck. "You knew," she whispered into his fur. "You knew." Victor watched them, shame settling deeper than any loss he had ever paid for. The Ocean Heart lay safely in police custody now, but the real damage remained in the room, standing in muddy shoes, holding his wounded dog, trying not to cry in front of strangers. Outside, the crowd waiting for the auction began to stir. News moved fast through rich houses. It moved even faster when the truth had teeth. Annie kept one hand on Rex and looked toward the open doors where Claudia had disappeared. For 4 days, she had worked quietly in Victor Harrington's garden, hoping nobody would notice how badly she needed the job. Now everyone knew her name. The name Annie Carter moved through Harrington Estate faster than any waiter carrying champagne. By the time Claudia Whitmore was placed in the back of a police car, the guests in the East reception room had already heard 3 different versions of the truth. Some said the fiancé had been framed. Some said the gardener had almost gotten away with a setup. Some said the dog had found the diamond before anyone else had the courage to look. The last version was the only one that made Samuel Brooks nod. Annie stayed near the side hallway with Rex pressed against her leg. She had washed her hands twice in the powder room, but she could still feel the touch of the officer's fingers near her wrist. She kept rubbing the same place until Samuel gently caught her hand. "Don't do that, child," he said. "You'll bruise yourself." Annie looked down as if the wrist belonged to someone else. "I thought they were going to take me." "I know. I kept thinking about my mom," she said, her voice almost too low to hear. "She used to tell me never to touch what wasn't mine, not even a penny on somebody's floor. I kept thinking, if they put me in that car, people would say she raised a thief." Samuel's face softened. "Your mother's name is safe tonight." Annie nodded. But the fear had not left her. Being cleared by evidence did not erase the minutes when everyone had believed the worst. It did not erase Claudia's words. Poor. Uneducated. Trash. The kind of words people apologized for only when caught, never when they thought they were among their own. Across the hall, Victor spoke with the police chief near the entrance to his private office. His shoulders looked heavier than they had an hour earlier. The Ocean Heart had been sealed in an evidence case and carried away under guard. The auction house representative stood nearby, pale and sweating, whispering into a phone about delay notices and insurance documents. The police chief wrote in a small notebook, "We'll need a formal statement from Miss Carter. Not tonight if she's too shaken, but soon." Victor glanced toward Annie. "Of course. And Mrs. Whitmore's phone, records, financial accounts, and any security footage from the office wing. You'll have it. Good, because this was not an impulse theft, hidden compartment, false accusation, attempt to redirect the search. She planned it." Victor's jaw tightened. "I understand." The chief looked at him for a moment, not unkindly. "Do you?" Victor did not answer right away. From where Annie stood, she could not hear every word, but she saw the pause. It was the kind of pause adults made when the truth had reached a place pride could not defend. The chief closed his notebook. "You reported a missing diamond. Your fiancé nearly sent an 18-year-old girl out of here in cuffs. We found the stone in her bag. That is the legal part. The rest is yours to face." Victor looked down the hall again. Annie looked away before their eyes could meet. Rex gave a small whine. "You need a vet," Annie murmured, kneeling beside him. She ran her hand carefully along his side, stopping when he flinched. "I'm sorry she hurt you." Samuel pulled out his phone. "Already called Dr. Mason. He's on his way." Old man answers for Rex faster than he answers for most humans. That almost made Annie smile. A housekeeper Annie had seen only once stepped into the hallway holding a glass of water and a folded napkin. She was a woman in her 50s with gray at her temples and kind but careful eyes. "Miss Carter," she said, offering the glass. "You should drink something." Annie took it with both hands. "Thank you, ma'am." The woman glanced toward the reception room, then lowered her voice. "I'm sorry for what was said in there." Annie did not know what to do with that apology. It was not the woman's fault, yet it touched something raw. "Thank you." The housekeeper nodded and returned to the main hall, where staff were trying to hold the evening together with trays of coffee and quiet instructions. The world had not stopped. That bothered Annie. A woman had tried to destroy her life, and somewhere nearby people were still asking whether the salmon appetizers should be served warm. Victor approached slowly. Samuel saw him coming and straightened, but he did not leave Annie's side. "Annie," Victor said. She stood because that was how she had been raised. When an older person spoke to you, you stood, even when that person had wounded you. Especially then, her grandmother used to say, "Because your manners belong to you, not to them." "Yes, sir." Victor flinched at the "sir." Earlier, it had sounded respectful. Now it sounded like distance. "Dr. Mason is coming for Rex," he said. Annie nodded. "Good. I would like you to sit somewhere quiet while we wait. You don't need to be in this hallway." "I'm fine." "You're not." Annie looked at him then. "No, sir, I'm not." Samuel's eyes moved between them, but he stayed silent. Victor accepted the blow without defense. "You're right." For a few seconds, only the low noise from the reception room filled the space. Forks against plates, doors opening and closing. A woman laughing too loudly because she did not know what else to do in a house where scandal had entered before dessert. Victor said, "I should not have spoken to you the way I did." Annie's grip tightened around the glass. "You thought I stole it?" "Yes." "Because I was near the room?" "Partly." "Because I was new?" "Yes." "Because I'm poor?" Victor closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." Annie's throat tightened, but she forced the next words out. "Because I'm black?" Samuel looked down at the floor. Victor opened his eyes. He could have stepped around it. Many men like him knew how to step around words that made rooms uncomfortable. But he did not. "Yes," he said quietly. "That was part of it too, even if I did not want to admit it to myself." Annie looked away first. Not because he had lied, but because he had told the truth, and the truth hurt in a different way. Victor's voice grew rougher. "I saw your apron before I saw your character. I saw your circumstances before I saw your fear. I let Claudia put a story in front of me, and I accepted it because it was easier than questioning the person standing beside me." Annie wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I needed this job." "I know." "No, you don't," she said, not loudly. "You know I need money. That's not the same thing. I needed this job because I'm trying to keep the lights on. Because my landlord already gave me until Friday. Because I have an acceptance letter for college sitting under my bed. And every month I don't go, it feels like the life my parents wanted for me gets farther away." Victor said nothing. Annie swallowed. "Tonight, for a few minutes, I thought it was gone for good." Rex leaned against her leg again. Victor looked at the dog, then at Annie. "He trusted you when I didn't. He doesn't care if I'm poor." "No," Victor said. "He doesn't." The front door opened, and a man in a brown jacket entered carrying a medical bag. Rex's ears lifted. "Dr. Mason," Samuel called. The veterinarian moved down the hall with the brisk calm of someone who had treated animals in barns, kitchens, police stations, and expensive houses where people thought money could protect them from panic. "Well, Rex," he said, kneeling. "Heard you had yourself a night." Rex wagged his tail once, weakly. Annie knelt beside him. She kicked him hard. "I'll check him," Dr. Mason said. "You stay close if he likes you." "He does," Samuel said. Victor heard that. His face changed slightly, as if every small proof of Rex's trust in Annie added weight to his own failure. Dr. Mason examined Rex gently, pressing along the ribs, watching his breathing, checking his gums. "Bruised, maybe strained. I don't think anything's broken, but I want x-rays to be safe. He's tough." "He held on," Annie whispered. The veterinarian looked at her. "Good dogs do that when people give them a reason." Victor stood back while Annie helped calm Rex. In his own house, beside his own dog, he was the outsider now. He had earned that. The police chief returned with a folder. "Mr. Harrington, we've secured the office. We'll need to pause the auction or cancel." Victor looked toward the ballroom. The evening had been planned for months. Donors had flown in. Cameras were waiting. The Ocean Heart was supposed to raise money for children's hospitals. His staff expected him to salvage the event, smooth the scandal, protect the Harrington name. For most of his life, Victor had known exactly what the Harrington name required. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered what it had cost other people. He turned to Samuel. "Make sure Annie has a private room to rest in. Food, tea, whatever she needs." Annie stiffened. "I don't want to be hidden away." Victor looked at her, surprised. She held his gaze. "I was accused in front of everyone. Don't put me in a back room now like I'm something you're embarrassed about." Samuel's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Victor absorbed the words. "Then you won't be hidden." The police chief waited. "And the auction?" Victor looked toward the ballroom doors, where guests whispered under crystal lights, waiting to see whether wealth would cover shame the way it had covered so many things before. "The auction will go on," Victor said, "but not before I tell them what happened." Annie stared at him. Victor's voice was quiet, but it carried. Not part of it, all of it. Victor's words did not make the room quiet. They made it listen. For a moment, the police chief looked at him as if measuring whether the promise would survive the pressure waiting beyond the doors. Samuel stood with his hands folded in front of him, his eyes lowered but alert. Annie kept one hand on Rex's neck while Dr. Mason packed his stethoscope and checked the dog's breathing one more time. "You're serious," the chief said. Victor looked toward the ballroom. I have spent most of my life asking people to trust my name. Tonight, my name helped accuse the wrong person. I won't let silence finish the job." Annie did not know what to do with those words. Part of her wanted them, part of her did not trust them. Rich men could say powerful things in polished rooms. She had seen people at church promise help after funerals and disappear before the rent was due. Words were easy when everyone was watching. Dr. Mason rose to his feet. "Rex needs an X-ray. I can take him now or after the event, but I'd rather not wait too long." Victor turned to Annie. "Would you like to go with him?" Annie looked down at Rex. The dog leaned into her leg as if the answer was obvious. "Yes, sir." Victor flinched again, but he did not correct her. "Then my driver will take you both to Dr. Mason's clinic. Samuel can go with you." Annie shook her head. "Not yet." Samuel frowned. "Annie, I want to hear what he says." She looked at Victor, not with challenge, but with something steadier. "If everyone heard me accused, I want to hear my name cleared." Victor nodded slowly. "Then you will." The police chief stepped aside to make a call. Staff moved through the hallway with the strange quiet of people trying not to become part of a story. A young waiter picked up a tray of untouched champagne flutes and nearly dropped it when Rex barked once at the sound of Claudia's name from someone's whisper. Annie knelt beside the dog. "Easy, boy." "She's gone." But Claudia was not gone. Not really. Her perfume still clung to the hallway. Her insults still hung in Annie's head. Her fingerprints were probably still on the velvet pouch that had almost sent an 18-year-old girl to jail. Annie had thought guilt would look dirty when exposed. Instead, it smelled like black roses and came wrapped in cream leather. Victor moved toward the ballroom doors, then stopped and turned back. "Annie, I will not ask you to stand beside me. You have no obligation to make this easier for me. I know, if you prefer to wait here, Samuel will stay with you." Annie looked past him at the doors. Behind them were donors, jewelers, hospital board members, retired executives, women in pearls, men with deep voices and soft hands, people who had believed Claudia because she belonged beside them and doubted Annie because she did not. Her stomach turned, but she stood. "I'll stand in the back," she said. Samuel leaned close. "You sure, young lady?" "No," Annie said. "But I'm going." That was honest enough for him. He offered his arm. Annie did not take it at first. Then her knees shook, and pride felt less important than staying upright. She rested her hand lightly on his sleeve. Victor opened the ballroom doors. The sound inside dropped piece by piece. First the laughter, then the silverware, then the low conversations. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Victor Harrington. A few turned toward Annie behind him. More turned when they saw Rex limping at her side. The ballroom had been arranged for elegance. White flowers, blue lighting, crystal centerpieces, a raised stage with the Harrington crest behind the auction podium. A large screen still showed a rotating image of the ocean heart, magnified until the blue diamond looked bigger than life. Beneath it were the words, "A night for children's hope." Annie stared at that phrase and felt something hard twist in her chest. Children's hope. The money from the auction was supposed to help young people get treatment, schooling, a chance. Yet minutes earlier, the same room had nearly watched a girl's future get crushed because she was easier to blame than a woman in diamonds. Victor walked to the stage without music. No introduction, no applause. He stood behind the podium and looked out at the people who had come to buy generosity in numbered paddles. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for your patience. I owe you an explanation before this auction continues." A man near the front called, "Is the diamond safe?" Victor paused. "Yes, the ocean heart has been recovered and is in police custody for the moment. It will be secured again before the sale proceeds." Murmurs moved through the room. Victor lifted one hand. "But before any of us discuss the diamond, we will discuss what happened to Annie Carter." Annie's fingers tightened on Samuel's sleeve. Several guests turned. Some looked embarrassed, some curious, some blank, as if they had not been part of anything and intended to remain that way. Victor continued, "Miss Carter is 18 years old. She came to this estate 4 days ago as a seasonal assistant to the landscaping team. She was recommended by Samuel Brooks, a man who has served this household with more integrity than most men bring to public office." Samuel looked down. Annie saw his jaw tremble once. "Tonight," Victor said, When the Ocean Heart went missing, suspicion was directed at Miss Carter. She was questioned. Her belongings were searched. Her character was attacked. Her poverty was treated as evidence. Her race was allowed to sit in the room as an accusation no one had the courage to name. The ballroom went completely still. Annie stopped breathing for a second. Victor's voice did not rise, but it grew heavier. I allowed that. I did not create every cruel word spoken tonight, but I gave them room, because I was afraid, because I was proud, because it was easier to doubt a young black woman in a work apron than to question the woman I intended to marry. A woman near the front put a hand to her mouth. One older man looked down at his lap. The diamond was not found on Miss Carter, Victor said. It was found hidden inside Claudia Whitmore's handbag. The sound that went through the ballroom was not a gasp. It was bigger, uneven, full of shock and satisfaction and shame. Victor waited until it passed. Mrs. Whitmore has been taken into custody. The police will complete their investigation. I will cooperate fully. A donor stood. Victor, are you certain this should be public right now? Victor looked at him. It became public the moment an innocent girl was accused in front of staff, officers, and guests. Privacy is not a privilege we apply only to the powerful. The donor sat down. Annie felt Samuel's sleeve shift under her hand. He was smiling faintly now, but his eyes were wet. Victor looked toward the back of the room. For the first time since taking the stage, he looked directly at Annie. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology in front of every person who heard or repeated suspicion against you. I was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not understandably wrong. Wrong. The words struck her harder than she expected. She had imagined an apology would make her feel clean. Instead, it made her feel the dirt more sharply, the mud on her apron, the sap on her fingers, the place on her wrist where the cuff had touched. But beneath that, something loosened. Victor stepped away from the podium. You came here to work, he said. You did your job, you told the truth. And when the room doubted you, you still found enough courage to speak. Rex gave a soft huff, as if agreeing. A nervous ripple moved through the ballroom, then faded. Victor looked down at the old dog. And Rex reminded us that loyalty is not proven by standing beside power. It is proven by standing beside the truth. Someone started clapping. It was not loud at first. One person, then three, then a slow wave across the room. Annie did not know whether she wanted it. Applause could not give back the hour she had lost. It could not erase Claudia's voice. But then she saw Samuel clap once, firmly, not for the room, not for Victor, but for her. Annie let herself stand a little straighter. The police chief entered quietly through the side door and gave Victor a small nod. The diamond could be secured. The event could continue. Victor returned to the podium. This auction was created to support children who deserve a future regardless of the circumstances they were born into. Tonight, that mission became less abstract to me. Before we begin, Harrington Crystal and Fine Jewels will add $5 million to the fund in Miss Carter's honor, directed toward education grants for young people who have had to choose work over school. Annie's eyes widened. Samuel whispered, Lord have mercy. Victor did not look at Annie for approval. That mattered. He was not asking her to bless his guilt in public. We will proceed, Victor said, but we will proceed with the truth first. The auctioneer stepped onto the stage carefully, as if walking onto ice. Staff began moving again. People sat, whispered, adjusted themselves in chairs. The evening resumed, but it was not the same evening. It could not be. Annie stepped back into the hallway with Samuel and Rex. The applause had faded behind the doors, replaced by the auctioneer's formal voice. Bids would rise. Money would move. The diamond would shine under controlled lights as if it had not spent the night hidden in a liar's bag. Dr. Mason waited near the entrance with his medical case. Ready now? Annie nodded. Victor came down from the stage just as she reached the side door. He did not stop her, only spoke from a respectful distance. Annie. She turned. I meant what I said. All of it. She studied him for a moment. Then make sure nobody forgets why you had to say it. Victor nodded. I won't. Annie looked at Rex. Come on, boy. Let's get you checked. Rex limped beside her through the side corridor, past the staff kitchen where coffee had gone cold and trays sat untouched. Samuel walked on her other side. steady as a porch light left on for someone coming home late. Outside, the night air was cool. Camera crews shouted questions from beyond the gates. But Samuel guided Annie toward the waiting car before anyone could reach her. Dr. Mason helped Rex into the back seat, and Annie climbed in beside him. As the car pulled away from Harrington Estate, Annie looked back once. The mansion glowed against the dark, all crystal and stone and old money. 4 days ago, she had entered it hoping to be invisible enough to keep a job. Tonight, she left it with her name spoken from a stage. Her innocence restored, and a wounded dog's head resting on her lap. The clinic smelled like antiseptic, old coffee, and dog treats. Annie sat on the floor of the examination room because Rex refused to stay on the padded table unless she stood beside him, and she was too tired to argue with a dog that had just saved her life. Dr. Mason had taken the x-rays, checked his ribs, cleaned a small scrape near his mouth, and given him something for the pain. Nothing was broken. Bruised, sore, angry, but not broken. Annie understood that feeling. Samuel stood by the window with a paper cup of coffee he had not touched. His security jacket was folded over one arm now, and without it he looked less like the man at Harrington's gate, and more like someone's grandfather waiting through a long night at a hospital. "You should eat something," he said. "I'm not hungry." "You said that yesterday too." Annie looked up. "You remember what I ate yesterday? I'm a security man, I notice things." She gave a tired half smile. "I had crackers. That's not food. That's what people eat when they're pretending they're fine." Dr. Mason came in carrying a small paper bag and handed it to Annie. "Turkey sandwich from the staff fridge. No charge. No pride attached." Annie hesitated. Samuel nodded toward the bag. "Take it, young lady." She did. Her hands shook a little when she unwrapped the sandwich. She had not realized how empty her stomach was until the first bite made her throat tighten. For a moment she remembered her mother packing lunches before school, folding napkins around apples that were always bruised on one side because bruised fruit was cheaper. Rex rested his head on her knee and watched the sandwich with interest. "No," Annie murmured. "Doctor's orders." Dr. Mason checked the chart. "Actually, a small piece of turkey won't kill him." Rex's ears rose. Samuel chuckled. "That dog understands English when food is involved." Annie tore off a tiny piece and held it out. Rex took it gently, then pressed his head back against her knee as if nothing in the world had ever been wrong. But everything had been wrong. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out and saw 6 missed calls from Mrs. Alvarez, her downstairs neighbor, and 2 from the landlord. Her stomach tightened again. Samuel noticed. "Bad news?" "Rent news," Annie said. "That's usually the same thing." She called Mrs. Alvarez first. The older woman answered on the second ring. "Annie, baby, are you all right? I saw something online. Somebody said police were at that mansion." "I'm okay," Annie said, though the word felt too large. "There was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding does not put your face on the internet." "Anja Froze. Me face?" Samuel's expression changed. Mrs. Alvarez sighed into the phone. "Someone posted a video. I only saw a little before my granddaughter took the phone from me. You were crying. A woman was yelling. People are saying things." Annie closed her eyes. Of course they were. The accusation had moved faster than the apology. It always did. "I didn't steal anything," Annie said. "I know that," Mrs. Alvarez said at once. "I asked if you were all right, not if you were guilty." That nearly broke her. Annie pressed her fingers over her eyes. "Thank you. You come home when you can. I left soup by your door. And don't answer the landlord tonight if he calls mean. I'll talk to him in the morning." Annie tried to laugh, but it came out like a breath. "You can't scare Mr. Dobbins. I raised 4 children in the Bronx. I can scare anybody." When Annie hung up, Samuel was already on his phone. "Send me the video," he said to someone. "Yes. Now." Annie looked at him. "Please don't. I need to know what's out there." "I know what's out there," me looking guilty. Samuel did not answer, which was answer enough. Dr. Mason leaned against the counter. "Victor Harrington's people will have a media team. They can correct it." "Correct it," Annie repeated. "Like a typo." Samuel put his phone away. "Annie." She stood too quickly, and Rex lifted his head. "No, it's okay. It's fine. Tonight I learned that people can search your pockets, your lunch, your apron, your whole life. Now strangers get to search my face on their phones. Child, I didn't even want to be noticed, she said. I just wanted a job. The room went quiet. A knock came at the door before anyone could answer. Dr. Mason opened it. Victor stood in the hallway without his tie, his suit jacket gone, his face more tired than Annie had ever seen it. He did not step inside until Dr. Mason moved back. I'm sorry to disturb you, Victor said. Samuel's tone was guarded. How did you know we were still here? Dr. Mason texted me that Rex was stable. Dr. Mason raised one hand. Only medical update. Nothing else. Victor looked at Annie. May I come in? It was his dog, his driver, his world pressing around hers, and still he asked. Annie noticed that, though she was not ready to reward it. Yes, sir. Victor entered but stayed near the door. Rex gave a small wag of his tail, then looked back at Annie before deciding whether to move. That hurt Victor in a visible way. The dog waited for Annie's comfort now. It's all right, she whispered. Rex rose slowly and walked to Victor. Victor knelt and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. Good boy, he said, voice rough. I'm sorry. Rex licked his hand. Victor stood and faced Annie. There is a video online. I heard. It shows the accusation. It does not show the discovery of the diamond. My team is working to remove the worst copies and release a statement. A statement won't change what people already decided. No, Victor said. It won't, not by itself. Annie waited. He continued. Tomorrow morning, there will be a press briefing at the estate. I will say on camera that you were innocent, that you were falsely accused, and that the diamond was recovered from Claudia Whitmore's handbag. The police chief has agreed to confirm the recovery. Samuel's eyebrows rose. That's a strong move. It is the minimum, Victor said. Annie looked at him. Why tomorrow? Because the accusation is already public tonight. If I wait, silence will do what Claudia tried to do. She wanted to distrust him. It would have been easier. But he sounded less like a man protecting his company, and more like a man who had finally understood the size of the wound. Victor took an envelope from inside his coat pocket and placed it on the counter, not in her hand. This is not payment for your forgiveness, he said. It is your wages for the week, plus the permanent position I intended to offer before this happened. You are free to refuse it. You are also free to take it and still be angry. Annie stared at the envelope. You think I can go back there? I don't know, Victor said. That should be your decision, not mine. My landlord called. I can help with that. Her face tightened. I'm not asking. I know. I am offering because tonight my house nearly cost you more than your job. Annie looked at Samuel. He gave no instruction this time. This was hers. What do you want from me? She asked. Victor's answer came quietly. Nothing tonight. That was the first thing he said that felt safe. Dr. Mason cleared his throat. Rex can go home, but he needs rest. No stairs, no rough play, pain medicine twice a day, and keep him away from women with sharp shoes. Samuel snorted before he could stop himself. Even Annie smiled a little. Victor looked at her and seemed grateful for that small sign, but he did not reach for it. Outside the clinic, the Harrington car waited under a yellow security light. The driver opened the back door, and Rex climbed in slowly with help. Annie hesitated on the curb. Victor said, "The car can take you home first." Annie looked down at her apron. Mud had dried stiff across the front. Sap darkened one pocket. She smelled like dog fur, clinic soap, and fear. "I don't want cameras near my building," she said. "I'll send an unmarked car." Samuel nodded. "I'll ride with her." Victor accepted it. Good. Before Annie got in, Victor spoke again. "Annie." She turned. "I will not ask you to forgive me, but I will make the truth louder than the lie." Annie held his gaze for a moment. "Make sure it reaches my landlord." Victor almost smiled, but shame stopped it halfway. "It will." The drive home was quiet. Rex stayed at the estate with Victor and Dr. Mason's instructions, but Annie could still feel the warmth of his head on her knee. Samuel sat beside her in the back of the unmarked car, watching the streets pass through tinted windows. When they reached her apartment building, the porch light flickered above the cracked steps. A covered bowl of soup waited by her door, just as Mrs. Alvarez had promised. Samuel walked her up. "You lock this door," he said. "Chain too." "I always do. And tomorrow, don't read comments." "I wasn't planning to." "You were." She sighed. "Maybe." He handed her his number written on the back of a gas receipt. "Call if anyone bothers you. I don't care what hour." Annie took it. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." He tipped his head. "Get some sleep, Miss Carter." Inside, the apartment was small and cold. Annie set the soup on the counter, locked the door, then pulled the old shoebox from beneath her bed. Inside was the acceptance letter she had not touched in weeks. Landscape architecture program. She sat on the floor with the letter in her lap. For months, it had felt like a life belonging to someone braver, luckier, less tired. Tonight, after almost losing her name, Annie realized something painful and plain. A future could be stolen without anyone taking a diamond. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box, and whispered into the quiet room, "Not mine, not anymore." Morning came without mercy. Annie had slept for less than 2 hours, curled on the old couch because the bedroom felt too quiet. When her phone alarm went off at 6, she was already awake, staring at the ceiling while Mrs. Alvarez's soup sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The apartment heater clicked, rattled, and gave up. Outside, a garbage truck groaned down the block, and someone's radio played low through the wall. For a few seconds, she let herself believe it had been a nightmare. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Then another. Then a text from Mrs. Alvarez. "Don't open the door for anyone you don't know." Annie sat up. Her stomach tightened. She opened her phone and saw her face. The video had spread overnight. It was short, shaky, and cruel. Annie stood in the grand hall with tears on her face while Claudia's voice cut through the room. "This girl has no real background. She has been here 4 days. Handcuff her." The clip ended before Rex attacked the bag, before the hidden pocket, before the diamond, before Victor's apology. The truth had been cut away, leaving only the part that made Annie look guilty. The comments were worse. "She's crying because she got caught. Why do they hire people without checking them? That poor fiancé." Another one playing victim. Annie turned the phone face down. For a moment, she could not move. She had survived the room. She had survived Claudia. She had survived the handcuffs almost closing on her wrist. But now strangers who had never seen her hands, never heard her mother's name, never watched her work under the sun, were passing judgment while drinking morning coffee. A knock sounded at the door. Annie froze. "Baby, it's me," Mrs. Alvarez called from the hallway. Annie exhaled and opened the door with the chain still latched. Mrs. Alvarez stood outside in a faded robe, gray curls pinned badly, holding a plate covered with foil. "I brought eggs," she said, "and don't tell me you're not hungry. Trouble burns calories." Annie unlatched the chain. Mrs. Alvarez stepped in, looked at Annie's face, and her tone softened. "Oh, honey." That was all it took. Annie covered her mouth and cried without sound. Mrs. Alvarez set the plate down and pulled her into a hug that smelled like lavender soap and fried onions. "They're saying things," Annie whispered. "People say things when a screen keeps them from seeing God watching." Annie gave a broken laugh against her shoulder. Mrs. Alvarez held her tighter. "You listen to me. A lie runs fast because it travels light. The truth takes longer because it carries proof." A hard knock hit the door. Both women turned. "Annie Carter?" a man called from the hall. "This is Mr. Dobbins. I need to speak with you." Annie closed her eyes. "The landlord." Mrs. Alvarez's mouth tightened. "Of course he does. Roaches hide until the light turns on. But landlords come when they smell fear." She opened the door before Annie could stop her. Mr. Dobbins stood in a brown coat, holding a folded notice. He was a narrow man in his late 50s with a mustache that looked angry even when the rest of his face did not. "I'm not here for trouble," he said, though his voice had already brought it. Mrs. Alvarez crossed her arms. "Then leave." He looked past her at Annie. "Miss Carter, I saw the video. I run a clean building. I can't have police trouble attached to my property." Annie stepped forward. "I wasn't arrested. That's not what people are saying. People are wrong." He lifted the notice. "Your rent is late. This was already an issue before last night." Mrs. Alvarez snapped. "Her parents died, Dobbins. What's your excuse for being ugly?" He ignored her. "I need payment by Friday or I begin the process." Annie reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. "I know. And if reporters come here, if neighbors complain, that changes things." Before Annie could answer, another voice came from the stairwell. It will change things for you, Mr. Dobbins, if you threaten a young woman after she was falsely accused in a felony investigation. Samuel Brooks appeared at the top of the stairs in his Navy security jacket, holding a paper coffee cup and wearing the expression of a man who had already decided not to like someone. Dobbins frowned. Who are you? Someone who heard every word you just said. This is private property. Samuel stepped into the hallway. Then handle your business privately and legally, not with gossip from the internet. Dobbins looked him over, then glanced back at Annie. Friday, Samuel said. You'll have your answer before then. The landlord hesitated, folded the notice back into his coat, and left. Mrs. Alvarez watched him go. I liked that. Samuel nodded politely. Ma'am. She looked him up and down. You want coffee? Yes, ma'am. Annie stared at Samuel. What are you doing here? Victor sent a car for the press briefing. I came ahead to make sure you were all right. I didn't say I was going. I know. Mrs. Alvarez handed him a mug from the cabinet without asking where anything was. Good, then she can decide after breakfast. Samuel accepted the mug. That sounds wise. Annie looked between them. I'm standing right here. Mrs. Alvarez peeled the foil off the plate. Then sit right there. The eggs were warm. There was toast, too. Buttered more generously than Annie would have allowed herself. She ate because both older people watched her like they would report her to somebody if she did not. Samuel placed his phone on the table. Victor's statement is scheduled for 9. The police chief will be there. Dr. Mason is bringing Rex after his morning check. Rex is coming? Samuel nodded. Victor thought people should see the dog that told the truth. Annie stared at her plate. And me? He said, you choose. Mrs. Alvarez leaned back. What do you want, baby? Annie did not answer quickly. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to stand in front of every person who shared that video and make them watch the rest. She wanted her parents alive. She wanted rent paid. She wanted her college letter to stop feeling like a dare. I don't know, she said. Samuel's voice softened. That's allowed. At 8:30, Annie stood in front of her closet. There was not much to choose from. Work jeans. 2 plain shirts. A black dress she wore to funerals and church, when she could still get to church. She reached for the dress, then stopped. No, she said. Mrs. Alvarez, standing behind her, nodded as if she understood before Annie did. Annie put on clean jeans, her best white blouse, and the old brown boots she used for work. She washed the dried sap from her hands, combed her hair back, and looked at herself in the small mirror. Mrs. Alvarez adjusted the collar of her blouse. Don't dress like you're asking them to accept you. Dress like you came to tell the truth. The ride back to Harrington Estate was quiet. Samuel sat in front with the driver this time, giving Annie room. As the car turned through the gates, cameras swung toward the driveway. Reporters shouted her name, though they had never earned the right to use it. Annie's hands tightened in her lap. You don't have to get out, Samuel said. Yes, Annie whispered. I do. The front steps were crowded with microphones. Victor stood at the center in a dark suit, no tie, his face drawn from a sleepless night. The police chief stood to his right. Dr. Mason stood near the side with Rex on a leash. The dog wore no bandage, but moved carefully. When he saw Annie, his tail lifted. That gave her courage. Victor saw her and stepped away from the microphones. He did not reach for her. He only asked, Are you sure? Annie looked at the cameras, then at Rex, then at the man whose house had almost ruined her. No, she said, but I'm here. Victor nodded and returned to the microphones. The questions exploded at once. Mr. Harrington, was your fiancée arrested? Did the gardener steal the diamond? Is the auction canceled? Was the video real? Victor raised one hand. I will answer what matters. Last night, Annie Carter was falsely accused of stealing the Ocean Heart. She did not steal it. She did not assist anyone in stealing it. She was innocent. The shouting stopped just enough for his words to land. The diamond was recovered from a hidden compartment in Claudia Whitmore's handbag. Mrs. Whitmore was taken into custody. The police are investigating further. The chief stepped forward. That statement is accurate. Miss Carter is not a suspect. Annie felt the words pass through the cold morning air and reach places last night's truth had not. Victor continued. A partial video was shared online. It showed accusation without truth. I am asking every outlet, every guest, and every person who posted it to share this correction with the same energy. A reporter called, "Miss Carter, do you have anything to say?" Annie had not planned to speak. Victor turned his head slightly. "You do not have to." But Rex was looking at her. Annie stepped to the microphones. They seemed too tall, too many, too hungry. She gripped the edge of the podium. "My name is Annie Carter," she said. Her voice shook, but it held. "I came here to work. I didn't come here to steal. Last night, people searched my clothes, my bag, and my character before they searched for the truth. No one interrupted." She swallowed. "I'm grateful the diamond was found, but I hope next time people remember that being poor is not evidence. Being new is not evidence. Being black is not evidence." The morning went silent. Then Rex barked once. A few people laughed softly, not at Annie, but with relief, with recognition, with the strange human need to breathe after truth has been spoken. Annie stepped back. Victor looked at her with shame and respect mixed together. "Thank you," he said. She did not answer. Not yet. As cameras flashed, Annie looked past the gates toward the road that led back to her apartment. Her bills. Her unfinished life. The world had not fixed itself in one morning. But the lie no longer stood alone. For the first time since Claudia had pointed at her, Annie felt the truth begin to catch up. By noon, Annie's name was no longer trapped inside the short, ugly video. Victor's statement spread faster than the accusation had, not because people suddenly cared about fairness, but because the story had become bigger. A billionaire's fiancée arrested, a rare blue diamond hidden in a designer bag, a German shepherd exposing the truth. Reporters loved the shape of it. They loved Rex most of all. At Mrs. Alvarez's apartment building, neighbors who had avoided Annie's door that morning now stood on the front steps pretending they had always believed her. One woman from the second floor offered a casserole. A man who never held the elevator suddenly told her he was proud of how she handled herself. Annie thanked them because her mother had raised her to be polite, but she did not mistake noise for loyalty. Mrs. Alvarez watched from her doorway with narrowed eyes. Funny how people find kindness after the cameras do. Annie set the casserole on the counter. "I don't know what to do with all this. Eat the parts that help, throw away the rest." That sounded like something simple people said about food and wise people meant about life. Samuel had driven Annie home after the press briefing, then left to return to the estate. Victor had asked if she wanted the day off, the week off, anything she needed. Annie had said she needed to go home. She needed 4 walls that did not belong to him. She needed to hear the pipes rattle and the downstairs baby cry and the old refrigerator hum like nothing in the world had changed, even though everything had. But by early afternoon, the real world knocked again. This time it was not Mr. Dobbins. It was 2 detectives in plain clothes, a black woman in her 40s named Detective Harris, and a white man with a careful voice named Detective Nolan. They showed their badges through the cracked door and asked if Annie felt able to give a statement. Mrs. Alvarez stood behind Annie with a dish towel in her hand like a weapon. Detective Harris noticed and gave a small nod. "Ma'am, you're welcome to stay if Miss Carter wants you here." Annie did. They sat at the kitchen table. The detectives declined coffee. Mrs. Alvarez made it anyway. Detective Harris opened a notebook. "Annie, I know you've repeated yourself a lot. We're going to go step by step. And if you need a break, you say so." Annie nodded. "Start with when you first entered Mr. Harrington's office that morning. I went in around 8:30 to take Rex for his walk. Mr. Harrington lets him out through the side garden after breakfast. The diamond was on the velvet tray then. I remember because I had never seen anything like it. I didn't go near it. I just clipped Rex's leash. Was anyone else in the room? No, but I smelled perfume." Detective Nolan looked up. "Black Rose?" Annie nodded. "Strong. Near the tray." Harris wrote that down. "Had you smelled it before?" "Yes. Mrs. Whitmore wore it every day I was there. You could tell when she passed a hallway." Mrs. Alvarez muttered. "Some people announce themselves before their sins do." Detective Harris's mouth twitched, but she kept writing. Annie continued, telling them about the balcony, the bougainvillea, the 5 minutes Victor went downstairs, the sound of heels, the empty tray, the dog hair, Rex staring at the bag. She spoke slowly. Sometimes her voice shook, but she did not stop. When she finished, Detective Nolan asked, "Did Claudia Whitmore ever speak to you before last night?" Annie looked down at her hands. "Not much. The first day, she asked if I knew which entrance staff should use. I was already using it." "How did she say it?" "Like I didn't." Harris nodded once, as if that answer told her more than a longer one. "Any threats?" Annie hesitated. "Not direct. But on the third day, I was trimming near the Rose Walk. She came outside on the phone. She didn't know I was there. She said she needed more time. She said the funds were tied up and someone would be paid after the auction." The detectives looked at each other. Nolan leaned forward. "Exact words?" "I don't remember exactly. Something like, 'After the auction, you'll get what you're owed.' Then she saw me and stopped talking." Harris wrote quickly. "Did she seem upset?" "She looked angry that I hurt her." Mrs. Alvarez set coffee in front of the detectives. "Now you want coffee." Detective Nolan took the mug. "Thank you, ma'am." When the detectives left, Annie felt wrung out. Every answer had pulled her back into that room. Still, there was something different about telling the story to people who listened from the beginning instead of waiting for her to slip. Mrs. Alvarez locked the door behind them. "You did good. I'm tired of being brave." "Then be tired. Bravery doesn't mean you don't sit down." Annie sat. Her phone buzzed again. This time the name on the screen was Victor Harrington. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Annie," Victor said. "I'm sorry to call. Detective Harris said they took your statement." "They did. Are you all right?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for telling me the truth." "I wasn't telling it for you." "I know," he said. "I still needed to hear it." Annie looked at the acceptance letter on the table. She had taken it out again that morning, though she did not know why. Maybe because after nearly losing her future, she wanted to see proof that one had once been offered. Victor spoke again. "I also called your landlord." Her back stiffened. "You what?" "I did not discuss your private affairs beyond what was necessary. I told him Harrington Estate would cover any rent delay caused by your work schedule or by last night's events. I told you I wasn't asking." "I know. I'm not trying to own the problem. I'm trying to remove one consequence you did not earn." Annie did not answer. Victor continued. "He also received a call from an attorney explaining that any attempt to evict you based on a false public accusation would be documented." Mrs. Alvarez, who had no shame about listening, whispered, "Good." Annie covered the phone. "Mrs. Alvarez." "What?" I said, "Good." Victor heard enough to almost laugh, but he kept his tone steady. "There is something else. Dr. Mason says Rex is resting. He keeps walking to the garden door and looking for you." Annie's face softened before she could stop it. "He does?" "Yes. He's ignoring me with great discipline." That pulled a small smile from her. Victor heard it. "He would like to see you when you feel ready. Not for work. Just to see him." Annie looked at her boots by the door, still marked with Harrington soil. She should hate that place. Part of her did. But Rex was there. Samuel was there. Her tools were still in the shed. The bougainvillea she had been trimming was probably still half cut at the balcony, frozen in the moment her life had turned. "I don't know when I'll be ready," she said. "Then we'll wait." After she hung up, Mrs. Alvarez slid the acceptance letter closer to her. "You going to tell him about this?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't want him fixing me like a charity project." Mrs. Alvarez sat across from her. "Baby, accepting help is not the same as becoming owned by it. But you're right to make him prove the difference." That evening, when the sky turned orange between the apartment buildings, Annie walked to the small grocery on the corner. She wore a hoodie and kept her head down. At the checkout, the old cashier, Mr. W2, Patel, looked at her, then at the television mounted above the lottery tickets. Her face had just appeared on a local news segment beside Rex's. He did not ask questions. He scanned her bread, milk, and apples, then placed a small bag of dog treats beside them. "I don't have a dog," Annie said. "No," he replied, "but you know one." She stared at the bag. He pushed it gently toward her. For the hero, Annie paid for her groceries but not the treats. He would not let her. Outside, she stood under the streetlight holding the small bag and felt the day's weight shift. Not vanish. Just shift. Justice had not arrived all at once. It had come in pieces. A dog's teeth, a hidden pocket, a public apology, a detective who listened, a neighbor with soup, a cashier with treats. None of it erased what Claudia had done. None of it erased what Victor had believed. But it gave Annie something to stand on. When she returned home, a news clip played from Mrs. Alvarez's apartment. Victor's voice came through the wall, clear and measured. Being poor is not evidence. Being new is not evidence. Being black is not evidence. Annie stopped in the hallway. Those had been her words. Now the city was hearing them. She unlocked her door, set the groceries down, and placed the dog treats beside her college letter. For the first time in months, the letter did not look like a life too far away to touch. It looked like a question waiting for an answer. The question waited on Annie's table until morning. She woke before sunrise to the sound of rain ticking against the window and a bus sighing at the curb below. For a while she stayed still, watching gray light crawl across the ceiling. The apartment felt different now, though nothing had changed. Same cracked wall near the heater, same kitchen chair with one loose leg, same stack of bills held down by a salt shaker. But beside the bills sat the dog treats and the college letter, and together they made the room feel less like a place where dreams came to die. Her phone buzzed at 7:13. Samuel Brooks. "You awake, young lady?" Annie typed back, "Yes." His reply came fast. "Rex is sitting by the garden door again, pretending he isn't waiting for you." Annie smiled despite herself. A second message followed. No pressure, just reporting suspicious behavior. She made coffee thin enough to see through and ate toast with the last of Mrs. Alvarez's eggs. She dressed in jeans, the white blouse from the press briefing, and her brown work boots. She stood by the door for almost 5 minutes before picking up the dog treats. Mrs. Alvarez opened her door before Annie knocked. "You're going back, just to see Rex?" "Mm-hmm. I'm not working." "I didn't say you were." Annie looked down the hallway. "What if everyone stares?" "They will. That's not comforting. It's honest." Mrs. Alvarez stepped closer and fixed the collar of Annie's blouse like she had the day before. "Let them stare at your back while you keep walking." The unmarked Harrington car waited outside. Samuel was driving this time. He leaned across and pushed the passenger door open. "Morning. You're not supposed to be my chauffeur," Annie said. "I'm not. I'm off duty for another hour, and I don't trust half the internet not to act foolish." She got in. "That's still being my chauffeur. That's being old enough to know trouble has wheels." Rain streaked the windshield as they drove through town. The radio was low, tuned to an old soul station Samuel said was better for the nerves than morning news. Annie held the bag of dog treats in her lap and tried not to think about the last time she had gone through Harrington's gates. She had left in the dark with Rex's head on her knee, her name newly cleared but still sore. At the estate, the iron gates opened before the car stopped. Reporters were gone, but 2 security officers stood near the drive. They nodded at Samuel and then at Annie. Polite, but careful. The house rose ahead of her through the rain. All pale stone, tall windows, and trimmed hedges. Yesterday, it had looked like judgment. Today it looked like something quieter, but not safe. Not yet. Rex was at the side entrance before Samuel put the car in park. The dog barked once, then winced at his own ribs and tried to wag his tail without moving too much. Annie forgot every camera, every insult, every polished hallway. She hurried to him and dropped to her knees under the covered porch. "Hey boy," she whispered. "You're supposed to be resting." Rex pressed his head into her chest. Samuel stood back with his hands in his pockets. "That dog's doctor said no excitement." Rex heard it as a suggestion. Annie opened the treats. "Mr. Patel sent these." Rex sniffed the bag, then looked at Samuel as if asking whether rules existed. "One," Samuel said. Annie gave him one. Rex took it like a gentleman, then leaned against her leg. Victor appeared in the doorway. He wore a dark sweater instead of a suit, and there was a tiredness in him that money could not tailor away. He stopped when he saw Annie with Rex, and did not interrupt until she looked up. "Thank you for coming." "I came for him," Annie said. "I know." That answer made it easier to stand. Inside, the mudroom smelled of wet coats and lemon cleaner. Someone had set a towel by the door for Rex's paws. Annie noticed little things now. The staff moving gently around her, the gardener's gloves she had left on a shelf, the empty hook where Claudia's cream coat had hung 2 days earlier. Absence had its own shape. Victor led them toward the breakfast room, then stopped. Would you rather stay near the garden? Yes. They went through the side corridor to a glass-walled sunroom overlooking the east garden. Rain dotted the windows. Beyond them, the bougainvillea on the balcony hung half-trimmed, its pink flowers bright against the gray morning. Annie stared at it. I didn't finish. No, Victor said. Everything stopped. Samuel excused himself to check the gatehouse, though Annie suspected he stayed close enough to hear if voices rose. Victor motioned toward a chair but did not sit until Annie did. Rex settled beside her feet. I owe you a conversation, Victor said. You already apologized. In public. That was necessary. It was not enough. Annie said nothing. He folded his hands on the table. I spoke to the police this morning. Claudia's accounts show large transfers to crypto exchanges. Then losses. There were threats from lenders. She had a buyer waiting overseas for the diamond. Annie looked toward the rain. So I was just convenient. Victor's face tightened. You were targeted. Because I was new. Yes. Because nobody would miss me in this house. I would like to say that isn't true, but it was. He took the truth without arguing. Yes. Annie appreciated that more than another apology. Victor continued, Samuel did not miss you. Rex did not. But I almost did. And this is my house. That failure is mine. Rex sighed heavily, as if agreeing. Annie looked down and scratched behind his ear. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. You are not supposed to do anything for my comfort. That's not what I mean. She turned the treat bag in her hands. Yesterday, people thought I was a thief. Today they call me brave. I'm the same person. Yes, Victor said. They changed their story. You didn't change your character. She let that sit for a moment. Rain ran down the glass in thin lines. The garden outside was soaked, the soil dark, the leaves heavy. Annie could see what needed trimming, what needed staking, what had been planted for show instead of health. Even after everything, her mind still read the garden like a page. Victor noticed. You see work out there. I see roots choking under that east bed. He almost smiled. The designer said it was elegant. It is, from far away. And up close? Up close it's expensive and tired. Victor looked out the window. That could describe more than the garden. Annie did not answer, but the corner of her mouth moved. He reached for a folder on the table and pushed it toward her, stopping halfway so she could choose whether to touch it. This is not a demand. It is not charity. It is an offer. A formal position on the landscaping team, full benefits, flexible hours if you choose to return to school. Separate from that, I would like to fund your education in landscape architecture, not because guilt writes checks, though I have plenty of guilt, because what you said about the garden in 10 seconds was more honest than what I paid consultants to miss for 3 years. Annie stared at the folder. Her first instinct was to push it back. Pride rose fast, protective and sharp. Then she thought of the college letter under her bed, the rent notice, her mother's hands folding lunch napkins, her father once pointing out old brickwork downtown and telling her that somebody had imagined every building before anybody built it. What do you get? She asked. Victor's answer came slowly. A chance to make one wrong thing less permanent, and perhaps a better garden. That's all? No. I also get the discomfort of knowing you may never fully trust me. I earned that. Annie looked at him then. He did not seem offended by her caution. That mattered. She opened the folder but did not sign. The salary number made her blink. The tuition letter beneath it made her throat close. I need time. Take it. And I want Samuel to read it. I hoped you would. Rex lifted his head at Samuel's name, and Annie laughed softly for the first time in 2 days. Victor heard it and looked down, as if giving the sound privacy. Annie closed the folder. I'll think about it. That is more than I deserve. No, she said, standing. It's exactly what you get today. Victor accepted that. As Annie stepped back onto the porch with Rex beside her, the rain thinned into mist. The bougainvillea still needed trimming. The east bed still needed saving. Her future still needed money, time, and courage she was tired of spending. But for the first time, the question on her table had followed her into the daylight, and it had not scared her as much. Annie brought the folder home in Samuel's truck because she did not want the Harrington car waiting outside her building again. It attracted curtains, whispers, and people who suddenly remembered they had always been friendly. Samuel placed the folder on her kitchen table and sat across from her with a ballpoint pen, a legal pad, and the serious expression of a man preparing for Sunday school finances. Mrs. Alvarez came in without knocking, carrying coffee and a plate of toast. "I heard papers." Annie looked up. "You heard papers?" "I hear trouble. Papers usually come with it." Samuel adjusted his glasses. "This is an employment contract and tuition sponsorship offer." Mrs. Alvarez pulled out a chair. "Then pour me in." Annie should have felt crowded, but she did not. The small kitchen had always seemed too narrow when bills were spread across the table. Now, with Samuel reading slowly, and Mrs. Alvarez muttering whenever the language got too fancy, the room felt steadier. Samuel read every page. He underlined terms, circled dates, frowned at 2 clauses, and called a nephew who worked as a paralegal in Newark. Annie sat with her hands wrapped around a mug, listening to older people protect her future, with the kind of patience she had not known she needed. "This part here," Samuel said, tapping the paper, "says the tuition assistance continues as long as you maintain good academic standing. That's normal." "What does good mean?" Mrs. Alvarez asked. "Because I don't trust rich people's adjectives." Samuel nodded. "Good question." Annie almost smiled. They went line by line. The job paid more than Annie had made in any month of her life. Health insurance. Paid sick days. Flexible scheduling around classes. Tuition paid directly to the university if she chose to enroll. No requirement that she remain employed at Harrington Estate after graduation. That part Samuel read twice. "He didn't buy you," Mrs. Alvarez said finally. "He left the door open." Annie looked at the signature line. "A door can still feel like a trap." Samuel folded his hands. "Then don't sign today." "I need money today." Mrs. Alvarez's face softened. "Need makes every offer look like rescue. That's why you slow down." Annie looked toward the window. Downstairs, children were running through puddles near the curb. The rain had stopped, but the street still held its shine. She thought of the East Garden, the choking roots, Rex's head against her knee, Victor saying, "I earned that." She thought of Claudia calling her nothing. She thought of how close nothing had come to becoming the truth in police paperwork. "I want to work," Annie said. "I don't want to hide in this apartment while people talk about me." Samuel nodded. "Working is one thing. Returning to that house is another." "I know. Then make rules before you go back." Mrs. Alvarez leaned forward. "Good. Rule 1. Nobody talks to you like that woman did. Not staff, not guests, not billionaires with sad eyes." Samuel wrote it down as if it belonged in the contract. Respectful workplace conditions. "Rule 2, Mrs. Alvarez continued. You are not alone in private rooms with people who accused you." Samuel added, "Witness present for sensitive meetings." Annie listened as they built a small fence around her dignity. It was strange. She had spent so long trying not to inconvenience anyone that hearing people name what she deserved felt almost embarrassing. By evening, she called Victor. He answered on the first ring. "Annie, I read it. No rush. I have conditions. Tell me." She glanced at Samuel, who gave a small nod. "I want Samuel present when I sign anything. I want my schedule in writing. I want no media use of my name or image without asking me first. I want the staff told clearly that I'm not gossip. And I don't want the tuition tied to me forgiving you." Victor was quiet for a breath. "Agreed." "All of it?" "Yes. You didn't even ask your lawyers." "I will tell them to make it match." Mrs. Alvarez whispered. "Make him sweat a little." Annie covered the phone. "Please." Victor said. "I heard that." Mrs. Alvarez called toward the phone. "Good." For the first time, Annie heard Victor laugh softly. It faded quickly, but it was there. "Mrs. Alvarez is welcome to review the documents too." "She already is." "I expected as much." Annie looked at the folder. "I'll come tomorrow." "Not as a charity case." "No," Victor said, as Annie Carter. That night, she slept in her bed. The next morning, she returned to Harrington Estate with Samuel. She wore work jeans, a green button-up shirt, and the same brown boots. Not the funeral dress, not the white blouse from the press briefing. Work clothes, her clothes. At the gatehouse, the younger security guard stood when she entered. "Morning, Miss Carter," he said. Annie paused. "Morning." There was no smirk, no whisper, Just the greeting she should have received from the beginning. Samuel noticed. Better. Don't grade people out loud, Annie murmured. I'm old. I get privileges. The main staff had been gathered in the service hall. Victor stood at the front with Mrs. Langley, the house manager, and the head gardener, Paul Jensen. Annie stopped when she saw the group. Her hands tightened around the folder. Victor did not pull her forward or make a performance of her arrival. He spoke to the staff before turning to her. Miss Carter is returning today by choice. What happened to her in this house was unacceptable. If anyone repeats rumors, shares video, makes jokes, or treats her as anything less than a member of this staff, you will answer to Mrs. Langley and then to me. Mrs. Langley, the gray-haired housekeeper who had brought Annie water the night of the accusation, lifted her chin. And answering to me first will be unpleasant enough. A few staff members smiled nervously. Annie believed her. Victor continued. This household failed her. We will not fail her twice. No applause, no grand gesture, just rules. Annie preferred that. Paul Jensen approached afterward. He was a broad man in his late 50s with sun-browned skin and dirt under his nails that no soap could fully remove. I owe you an apology too, he said. Annie blinked. You weren't in the room. No, but I heard the accusation and thought, Lord, I hope it wasn't my new hire. I didn't ask if you were all right. I thought about my department first. He held out a pair of clean pruning gloves. That was small of me. Annie took the gloves. Thank you for saying it. He nodded toward the garden. You still want to finish that bougainvillea? For some reason, that question almost undid her. Not because it was emotional, but because it was ordinary. The work had waited. The plant had not judged. It only needed tending. Yes, she said, I do. Rex met her at the base of the balcony, moving carefully but determined. Annie knelt and gave him one of Mr. Patel's treats. You're supposed to be resting. Rex wagged his tail and ignored the advice. Paul watched them. That dog hasn't liked a gardener since he bit a sprinkler technician in 2018. Did the technician deserve it? Annie asked. Paul shrugged. Rex thought so. Annie climbed the ladder with Paul steadying it below. She clipped the dead branches first, then the crossed ones choking new growth. The morning sun warmed the stone wall. The scent of cut leaves rose around her. Through the open balcony door, she could see Victor's office. The velvet tray was gone. So was the diamond. The room had been cleaned, but memory still sat there. Her hand paused on the shears. Paul looked up. Need a minute? Annie breathed in, then out. No, I'm okay. And she was not lying. Not completely. By noon, the bougainvillea looked lighter. Air moved through the vines. Pink flowers that had been hidden under dead growth showed themselves in the sun. Annie stepped down and brushed leaves from her shirt. Victor stood at a distance near the garden path, not hovering, not pretending he had just happened by. It looks better, he said. It can breathe now. He looked at the plant, then at her. That matters. Yes, Annie said. It does. After lunch, she signed the revised contract in Victor's office with Samuel beside her and Mrs. Alvarez on speakerphone. The tuition agreement was separate, just as she had asked. The media clause was clear. Her schedule was written. No hidden pockets. When Annie signed her name, her hand shook once, then steadied. Victor signed after her. You welcome to Harrington Estate, Miss Carter. Annie closed the pen. Officially this time. Officially, he said. She stood to leave, then stopped at the door. Mr. Harrington? Yes? I'm still angry. Victor nodded. You should be. But I'm going to school. For the first time since she had met him, Victor smiled without looking powerful. He looked relieved. Good. Outside, Rex waited in the hall, tail thumping softly against the wall. Annie looked down at him. Come on, boy. We've got a garden to fix. Rex followed her into the afternoon sun, and this time, when people in the house watched Annie pass, they did not see a suspect, a charity case, or a girl who had almost been erased. They saw the woman who came back with her name intact. By the end of the week, Annie learned that returning to Harrington Estate was not the same as belonging there. Belonging took longer. It lived in small things. A coffee mug with her name written on masking tape in the staff kitchen. Paul Jensen asking her opinion before ordering new soil for the east beds. Mrs. Langley leaving a plate of chicken salad and crackers in the break room because she noticed Annie worked through lunch. Samuel tapping the gatehouse window each morning like a grandfather checking attendance. Rex limping beside her with the pride of a retired general who refused retirement. The work helped. Soil did not care about gossip. Roots did not ask who had accused her. Vines only responded to light, water, patience, and the courage to cut away what was dead. Annie understood that better than she expected. Still, there were moments when the old fear returned. The first time she walked past Victor's office alone. Her breath caught. The door was open. The room looked normal. Shelves of crystal awards, leather chairs, a clean desk, sunlight on the rug. But Annie saw the velvet tray that was no longer there. She saw the empty place where the diamond had been. She saw Claudia's face turning white when the hidden pocket clicked open. She stepped back without meaning to. Rex appeared beside her and leaned against her leg. "You're not supposed to sneak up on people," Annie whispered. Rex looked into the office and gave a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. Victor's voice came from behind them. "He does that to me too." Annie turned. "Sorry, sir. I wasn't going in. You're allowed to pass a doorway." "I know, but knowing and feeling were not the same thing." Victor stood a few feet away, holding a folder. Since she had signed the contract, he had been careful with distance. He did not summon her unless necessary. He did not ask if she forgave him. He greeted her each morning by name and let work speak where apologies might have become selfish. "The police returned some of the evidence logs today," he said. "Claudia's case is moving forward." Annie looked down at Rex. "Do I have to testify?" "Likely. Not immediately. Detective Harris said they'll prepare you before anything formal." Her hands tightened around her pruning gloves. "I don't want to see her again." "I understand." "No, you don't." The words came out sharper than she intended. Victor accepted them. "You're right. I don't." That made it harder to stay angry in the easy way. Annie looked through the office doorway. When she looked at me, it was like I was already guilty before I even spoke. Victor's voice dropped. "I know. You knew her." "I thought I did. You were going to marry her." "Yes." Annie turned back to him. "How do you miss that much hate in a person standing next to you?" The question hit him. He looked toward the window at the garden, where workers were spreading mulch beneath the rose walk. "Because she knew which parts of herself to show me," he said. "And because I liked the version she showed. That is not an excuse. It is the answer." Annie said nothing. Victor continued. "After my wife died, people came around with concern, advice, invitations, business opportunities, disguised as sympathy. Claudia was different. She knew when to be quiet. She remembered dates. She helped with charity events. She made grief feel organized. I mistook that for love." Annie listened despite herself. Older people often carried their pain in folded places. You did not see it unless a moment pressed hard enough. "My father used to say," Victor added, "a man who is lonely will sometimes call any light a sunrise." Annie looked at him then. "Was your father nice?" "No," Victor said, "but he was sometimes right." That almost made her smile. Rex nudged the office door with his nose, then looked at Annie as if impatient with human history. Victor stepped aside. "Would you like to see something?" Annie hesitated. "Not in the office," he said. "The garden records." That was different. He led her to a smaller room near the conservatory, where old plans of the estate were stored in flat drawers. Paul was already there, sorting through rolled blueprints with reading glasses low on his nose. "Miss Carter," he said. "Good. Tell him I'm right." Annie looked between them. "About what?" "The east garden drainage," Paul said. "I told Mr. Harrington it's been wrong for 10 years. Designers made it pretty. Rain made it stupid." Victor opened a drawer and pulled out an old landscape plan. "This was installed after my wife passed. I wanted something formal. Symmetrical. Controlled." Paul muttered. "Funeral flowers with plumbing." Victor ignored him. Annie said the roots were choking. She was right. "I'd like you to work with Paul on redesigning the east garden." Annie stared at him. "Me?" "With supervision," Paul said. "Don't look terrified. I'm supervising, not haunting." Victor pushed the plan toward her. "You have an eye for what lives, not just what looks expensive." That is harder to hire than people think. Annie ran her fingers along the edge of the paper. The drawing showed clean lines, clipped hedges, imported shrubs, a fountain placed for photographs rather than shade. It was beautiful in the way Claudia had been beautiful, arranged, costly, and false up close. "What do you want it to be?" Annie asked. Victor did not answer quickly. "Honest," Paul grunted. "That's not a plant category." Annie studied the plan. "It could have native grasses here, near the low ground. They'd handle the water better. Flowering dogwood along the side. Maybe black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers, instead of all these imported annuals. Less perfect, but stronger. More birds, too." Paul's expression changed. "You know plants. I read a lot. Reading is how poor people steal expensive educations," Paul said approvingly. Victor looked at him. "What?" Paul said. "It's a compliment." Annie laughed, then covered it with her hand. The sound surprised her. It surprised Victor, too, but he had the grace not to make a moment of it. They spent an hour over the plans. Paul argued about soil. Annie argued about sunlight. Victor mostly listened. Once, he suggested a row of white roses, and both Paul and Annie said no at the same time. "Too much?" Victor asked. "Too, Claudia," Paul said. Annie looked down fast, but Victor nodded. "Fair." By late afternoon, rain clouds gathered again. Annie went outside to mark the east bed with small wooden stakes. Rex followed, wearing the soft vest Dr. Mason had recommended so no one would forget he was injured and decide to roughhouse with him. No one would have dared, but Rex wore the vest like a badge. Samuel came down the path carrying 2 cups of coffee. "One black for me, one with enough cream to embarrass it for you." Annie took the cup. "Thank you." He looked at the stakes. "You're changing the whole thing." "Maybe." "Good. That garden always looked like it was afraid to get dirty." She sipped the coffee. "Mr. Harrington told me about his wife." Samuel's face softened. "Mrs. Harrington was kind. Not soft, but kind. There's a difference." "Did Claudia know her?" "No. Came later." Annie looked toward the house. "Do you think grief made him blind?" Samuel took his time. "Grief can fog the windows, but a man still has to clean them." That sounded like Samuel. Fair, but not gentle enough to let anyone hide. A black sedan pulled up near the front drive. Detective Harris stepped out with a folder tucked under her arm. Annie felt her stomach tighten. Samuel noticed. "Breathe first." Detective Harris walked toward them, nodding to Samuel before addressing Annie. "Miss Carter, I didn't want you hearing this from the news." Annie set the coffee down on the stone wall. "What happened?" "Claudia Whitmore made bail this afternoon." The garden seemed to go quiet. Samuel's jaw hardened. "Already?" "Her attorneys moved fast," Harris said. "She surrendered her passport. She is prohibited from contacting Miss Carter, Mr. Harrington, or any estate staff connected to the case. But I wanted you aware." Annie's throat went dry. "So she's out. She's being watched. If she violates the order, call us immediately." Rex growled low, as if he understood enough. Detective Harris looked at him. "That dog has better instincts than half the adults in this county," Samuel said. "More than half." Annie tried to steady her breathing. She had imagined Claudia behind bars, contained, unable to look at her or whisper threats in silk. Knowing she was out made the air feel thinner. Victor came from the house, his expression changing when he saw the detective. Harris told him the same thing. His face went still. "She won't come here," he said. Detective Harris held his gaze. "Powerful people sometimes believe rules are suggestions. Make sure your gates don't." Victor nodded. "Samuel will update security." "I already started," Samuel said. Annie picked up the wooden stakes, kneading something in her hands. "I'm not going to stop working because of her." No one argued. Detective Harris studied her with quiet approval. "That doesn't mean you pretend you're not scared." "I am scared." "Good. Fear can be useful if you don't let it drive." After the detective left, Victor offered to send Annie home early. She refused. She stayed until the last stake was in the ground, and the first drops of rain darkened the soil. When she finally stood, mud clung to her boots. Rex leaned against her. Samuel waited by the path. Victor stood near the porch, not too close. Annie looked at the garden she had begun to mark for change. Claudia was out. The trial was ahead. The internet still had teeth. Fear had not left, but neither had Annie. She wiped rain from her cheek and said to Rex, "Come on, boy. We're not done yet." Rain followed Annie home that evening, tapping against the windshield while Samuel drove in silence. She kept her hands folded over her work gloves, but her mind stayed at Harrington Estate, in the East Garden where the stakes stood like small warnings in the wet soil. Claudia was out on bail. The words had settled inside her like cold water. Samuel stopped in front of her building and left the engine running. "I'll walk you up. I can walk up by myself." "I know." She looked at him. "You're going to do it anyway." "Yes, ma'am." That almost made her smile. Almost. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and laundry soap. Mrs. Alvarez opened her door before Annie reached the second floor. She had a dish towel over one shoulder, and the expression of a woman who had already heard bad news from 3 sources, and trusted none of them until she saw Annie's face. "She's out," Mrs. Alvarez said. Annie nodded. "Come in. I need to change." "You need soup." "I had lunch. That was hours ago, and fear eats faster than hunger." Samuel cleared his throat. "She's right." Annie looked at both of them and gave up. Inside Mrs. Alvarez's apartment, the television was muted, but Annie saw Claudia's face on the screen. Not the broken face from the arrest, not the wild-eyed woman screaming at officers, but a polished photo from a charity magazine. The headline below read, "Whitmer released on bail as diamond theft case deepens." Mrs. Alvarez turned the television off. No more of her with dinner. They sat at the small kitchen table. Mrs. Alvarez served chicken soup with rice, thick enough to stand a spoon in. Samuel ate like a man who had missed lunch and was trying to remain dignified about it. Annie stirred hers more than she ate. "She can't contact me," Annie said. Mrs. Alvarez snorted. "People like that don't always need to contact you to touch your life." Samuel set down his spoon. "Security at the estate is tighter. Victor means that." "And outside the estate?" Mrs. Alvarez asked. "I'll be checking in." Annie looked up. "Mr. Brooks, you have a job. I had a job before you were born. I know how to keep one and still look after people. I'm not your responsibility." "No," he said. "You're my neighbor in the larger sense." Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "That's church talk. Means he's not leaving you alone." Annie stared at her soup. "I hate that I'm scared." Samuel's voice softened. "Fear is not shameful. Cowardice is letting fear make you cruel. You're not cruel. You're tired." That night, Annie locked her door, latched the chain, pushed a chair under the knob, then felt foolish for doing it and left it there anyway. She tried to read the university brochure Victor's office had printed for her, but every sound in the hallway made her look up. A pipe knocked. A neighbor laughed. A car door slammed outside. Each noise became Claudia's hand, Claudia's perfume, Claudia's voice saying, "This isn't over." By midnight, Annie stopped pretending she could sleep. She got up, opened the shoebox under her bed, and took out the old photograph of her parents. Her father stood in front of a city park with one hand on her shoulder. Her mother held a paper cup of lemonade and squinted into the sun. Annie had been 12, smiling with a gap between her teeth, not yet aware that a future could split open without warning. "What would you do?" she whispered. The picture did not answer, but her mother's face gave her the answer Annie already knew. You keep your name clean. You keep walking. You don't let somebody else's sin decide the size of your life. The next morning, she returned to the estate, not because she was unafraid, because she was tired of fear choosing her route. Victor met her near the East Garden, where the ground was still damp from rain. He looked as if he had slept as little as she had. Rex stood beside him in his soft vest, tail moving slowly when he saw Annie. "Morning," Victor said. "Morning." Rex came to her first. She knelt and gave him a treat from Mr. Patel's bag. "Don't tell Dr. Mason." Victor watched them. "Dr. Mason told me you'd say that. Then he understands us." "I believe he does." They walked toward the east bed, where Paul had already laid out soil samples in small labeled jars. He was kneeling by a drainage line, muttering at it like it owed him money. "Morning, Miss Carter," Paul said. "This garden is worse than I thought." "Good morning to you too." He pointed at the jars. "Clay heavy here. Too much water sitting in the low end. Those imported shrubs never had a chance. Pretty little victims of bad planning." Victor said, "You enjoy saying that." "I enjoy being right." Work began slowly, then took over. Annie measured the beds, marked root zones, and sketched rough lines on a clipboard Paul handed her. For 2 hours, no one mentioned Claudia. No one mentioned court. The garden demanded attention with honest problems. Water went where gravity took it. Roots grew where there was room. Plants died when people ignored what they needed. Annie found comfort in that kind of truth. Near lunch, Detective Harris arrived again. Annie saw her from across the garden and felt her body tighten. Victor noticed. "Do you want Samuel?" "Yes." Samuel was called from the gatehouse and arrived before Harris reached the patio. The detective greeted Annie first. "I wanted to update you in person," Harris said. "Claudia's attorneys are preparing a public argument that she was under emotional distress and that the bag may have been tampered with before she took possession of it." Paul, still holding a trowel, stared at her. "That's nonsense." "Yes," Harris said. "Nonsense can still make noise." Annie's mouth went dry. "Are they saying I planted it?" "They're suggesting multiple possibilities without naming one too clearly. That is often how defense teams test public reaction." Victor's face hardened. "She's doing it again." Harris nodded. "Likely." Samuel folded his arms. "How do we stop it?" "With facts," Harris said. "We found more." Annie looked up. Harris opened her folder. The hidden compartment in the handbag had Claudia's fingerprints on the interior clasp. No prints from Annie, no prints from Samuel. We also recovered fibers from the velvet tray inside the pouch. The black rose perfume bottle in the bag matches residue found near the office tray. And Claudia's secondary phone contains messages about selling blue inventory after the auction. Victor's voice was flat. "Blue inventory. That's how she referred to it." Annie felt anger move through her, clean and sharp. "She called it inventory while trying to send me to jail." Harris looked at her. "Yes." Rex growled softly. Paul scratched behind Rex's ear. "Dog agrees." Harris continued. "There is more. The buyer's contact has been identified. Federal agents may get involved because of the attempted international sale. This is moving beyond a local theft case." Victor turned toward the house, then back to Annie. "You should know all of this before the news twists it." "Will I have to speak again?" "Not publicly," Harris said. "Not unless you choose to. But you will likely be called for a deposition later. And eventually court, if the case goes to trial." Annie gripped the clipboard. "What happens if I don't want to?" Harris did not soften the truth. "Then prosecutors can still proceed with physical evidence. But your testimony matters. What you smelled, what you heard, how Claudia accused you, how Rex reacted. It helps show the frame-up." Annie looked at Rex. He was sitting now, calm, as if the worst thing in the world had already happened and been bitten. Samuel said, "You don't decide today." Harris nodded. "Exactly. Today, you breathe." After the detective left, Annie walked alone to the far end of the garden. The estate spread behind her, large and bright under a clearing sky. Beyond the hedges, the world kept moving, hungry for scandal, ready to believe or forget depending on the headline. Victor approached but stopped a few feet away. "I'm sorry." Annie did not turn. "For which part?" "All of it. That's too much for one apology." "I know." She looked down at the damp soil. "When I was little, my dad used to take me to public gardens on Sundays because they were free. He'd point at trees and say, 'Somebody planted shade they knew they might never sit under.' I used to think that was beautiful. It is. Now I think maybe justice is like that too. You do the right thing and hope somebody else gets to rest in it later." Victor said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "That is better than anything I have ever said from a podium." Annie wiped her cheek quickly, annoyed that she had started crying without permission. "I'll testify if I have to," she said. "Not for you. Not for your diamond. For the next girl they think nobody will believe." Victor bowed his head. "Understood." Rex came trotting carefully toward her, as if the matter was settled and everyone else had been slow to catch up. Annie crouched and pressed her forehead against his. "We're not done yet," she whispered. The east garden waited around them, half marked, half broken, ready to be remade. The east garden did not change quickly. For the next 3 weeks, Annie learned that broken things rarely looked dramatic while they were being repaired. They looked like mud, measurements, sore knees, bad weather, and people arguing over drainage. Paul complained every morning that the old design had been made by somebody who trusted catalogs more than roots. Samuel brought coffee and pretended he was only checking the perimeter. Rex followed Annie from bed to bed, moving better each day, though he still accepted sympathy treats as if prescribed by law. Victor watched from a distance at first. Then, little by little, he came closer. He asked questions, not the kind meant to test her, but the kind that waited for an answer. Why native grasses? Why move the stone path? Why let the dogwood lean instead of cutting it straight? Annie answered when she felt like it. When she did not, Paul answered for her with twice the irritation and half the patience. Nature doesn't like being bullied, Paul told Victor one afternoon while Annie marked the new rain garden. That's the lesson. Costs nothing. People still refuse to learn it. Victor looked at Annie. Is that the lesson? She pushed a stake into the soil. One of them. And the other? She stood and wiped her hands on her jeans. If you plant something where it can't breathe, don't blame it for dying. Victor took that in quietly. The court case moved in the background like thunder beyond the hills. Claudia's attorneys filed motions. Her public relations team released a statement calling the incident a tragic misunderstanding during a period of private emotional strain. The phrase made Annie stare at the screen in disbelief. A misunderstanding? She said in Samuel's gatehouse, where the television was mounted above a shelf of old security manuals. She called me trash and tried to have me arrested. Samuel turned the TV off. Some people call a fire a warmth problem if they're the ones holding the match. Detective Harris called twice a week. She kept Annie informed, never softening facts into comfort. Claudia's financial records were worse than expected. She had borrowed from offshore lenders, used fake investment entities, and contacted a broker in Geneva about a bluestone days before the auction. The hidden compartment in the handbag had been custom-made, so she didn't panic, Annie said during one call. No, Harris replied. She planned. That word mattered. Planned meant Claudia had looked at Annie before the theft and chosen her. Not as a person, as a place to throw blame. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Manhattan. Annie wore a navy dress Mrs. Alvarez found at a church resale shop and altered at the waist. Samuel drove her. Victor offered a car, but Annie asked him not to. There were still things she needed to do without being carried by his name. The law office sat high above the city, all glass, steel, and quiet carpet. Annie hated it as soon as the elevator opened. It was too clean, too calm, the kind of place where people could ruin lives without raising their voices. Detective Harris met her near the reception desk. You ready? No. Good. People who say yes usually haven't understood the room. Samuel sat in the waiting area with a newspaper he did not read. Before Annie went in, he caught her hand. Tell the truth slow, he said. No need to chase people who already know how to run. Inside the conference room, Claudia sat beside two attorneys. She wore pale gray, no jewelry except small pearl earrings, her hair pinned low. She looked less like a woman who had screamed in a mansion, and more like someone attending a charity board meeting after a difficult weekend. When Annie entered, Claudia looked at her and smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough to say she was still there. Annie felt the old fear rise. Then she remembered Rex's teeth on the bag. She sat. The questioning began gently. Name, age, address, employment. How long she had worked at Harrington Estate before the incident. 4 days, Annie said. Claudia's attorney, a thin man with silver glasses, leaned forward. Only 4 days. Would you agree that you were unfamiliar with the routines of the house? Yes. Unfamiliar with the staff? Some of them. Unfamiliar with Mrs. Whitmore? I knew her perfume before I knew her kindness. Detective Harris looked down at her notes. The court reporter's fingers paused for half a second, then continued. The attorney blinked. Please answer only the question asked. I did. He moved on. He asked about the office, Rex, the tray, her work on the balcony. He asked if she had ever touched the handbag. No. If she had ever touched the diamond. No. If she had any debts, rent, groceries, life, if she knew the value of the diamond. Not until people started saying millions like that explained why she must have wanted it. Then he asked, Isn't it possible, Miss Carter, that your fear caused you to misremember the smell of perfume? Annie folded her hands under the table so he could not see them shake. No. You're certain? Yes. After such a stressful event? I smelled it before the event was stressful. The attorney paused. Annie continued. That morning, when I took Rex from Mr. Harrington's office, the diamond was still on the tray, and the black rose perfume was strong beside it. Later, Miss Whitmore said she had not been in that room. Then she said she had. That's not my fear changing. That's her story changing. Claudia's smile disappeared. The attorney tried another path. You were angry at Mrs. Whitmore, were you not? After she tried to send me to jail, yes. A small sound came from someone near the wall, a cough hiding a laugh. The attorney frowned. He asked about race without saying race. He asked if Annie felt people at the estate treated her unfairly because she was new, because she was young, because she misunderstood wealthy social customs. Annie listened to each question, then answered the one he avoided. I was treated like my poverty was proof, she said, and like my skin made that proof easier to believe. The room went quiet. Claudia looked away first. The deposition lasted 3 hours. By the end, Annie's back ached, and her throat felt dry, but she had not broken. Outside, Samuel stood when he saw her. Well? I told it slow. Good. Detective Harris walked with them to the elevator. You did well. Annie leaned against the wall once the doors closed. I hated every minute. That doesn't mean it didn't matter. On the drive home, Samuel stopped at a diner off the highway. He said a person did not give a deposition on an empty stomach, and Annie was too tired to argue. They sat in a booth with cracked red vinyl seats while rain threatened the windows. Samuel ordered meatloaf. Annie ordered pancakes because breakfast foods felt less serious than the day had been. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed. Victor. She let it go to voicemail. Samuel noticed but said nothing. A minute later, a text appeared. I heard you were brave today. I also heard bravery is exhausting. No need to respond. Annie stared at it. Samuel poured syrup on his meatloaf by mistake. Noticed, then sighed like the day had finally defeated him. Annie laughed. Not politely. Really laughed. Samuel looked offended. This is your fault. You distracted me. I didn't say anything. You young people distract by existing. She laughed again, and the sound loosened something the deposition had tightened. That evening, when she returned to Harrington Estate to check the new plantings before sunset, Rex met her at the garden path with a bark that made Paul shout from the shed. No running. You dramatic old fool. Victor stood near the east bed, hands in his coat pockets. He did not ask about the deposition. He only nodded toward the garden. The dogwood arrived. Annie looked at the young tree wrapped in burlap, its branches bare but alive. It needs to go there, she said, pointing near the curve of the path, not centered. Victor looked at the spot. Because nature doesn't like being bullied? Because shade should fall where people actually sit. He smiled a little. That too. Together with Paul, they lowered the tree into place. Samuel arrived near the end and held the trunk steady while Annie checked the angle. Rex watched like an inspector. When the soil was packed and the tree stood on its own, Annie stepped back. It did not look like much yet. A thin young dogwood in damp ground. No flowers, no shade, no proof of what it might become, but its roots had room. Annie looked at it and thought of the testimony she had given, the words now recorded where Claudia could not erase them. Maybe justice was like this too. Not full grown, not comforting yet, but planted. Victor stood beside her, quiet. After a while, Annie said, It'll take years. Yes, he said. She nodded. Then we'd better take care of it. Spring came late that year, and the trial came with it. By then, the east garden had begun to show signs of life. The dogwood had small buds at the tips of its branches. The native grasses had taken root along the low ground, and the rain no longer sat in ugly puddles after every storm. Annie checked the beds each morning before work, touching the soil with her fingers the way some people checked a child's forehead for fever. Rex came with her, slower now but proud. Dr. Mason said his bruises had healed. Rex seemed to believe that meant he was cleared for full-time supervision of every living thing on the property. You are not in charge, Annie told him one morning as he stood between her and a wheelbarrow. Rex looked at her and did not move. Paul Jensen walked by carrying a shovel. He heard you. He disagrees. The trial began on a Monday in a county courthouse that smelled of old paper, floor polish, and coffee from a machine nobody trusted but everyone used. Annie arrived with Samuel. Victor had offered to ride with her, but she asked him not to. She did not want to enter that building as part of his apology. She wanted to enter as herself. Samuel wore his best dark suit and a tie with tiny blue stripes. Mrs. Alvarez came too, dressed in a navy church dress and low black shoes. Her purse held tight in both hands. She had closed her apartment door that morning with the seriousness of someone leaving for battle. "You don't have to come," Annie had told her. Mrs. Alvarez had looked offended. "I missed 3 PTA meetings and one cousin's second wedding for less important things than this." In the courthouse hallway, Detective Harris met them near the elevators. "You ready?" she asked. Annie shook her head. "Good. Same as last time." Samuel leaned toward Annie. "Tell it slow." "I remember." "And breathe before answering," Mrs. Alvarez added. "And don't let that lawyer make you feel small. God did not put you on this earth for some man in shiny shoes to shrink you." Detective Harris smiled. That too. Inside the courtroom, Claudia Whitmore sat at the defense table in a cream suit. Annie noticed the color first. It was nearly the same shade as the handbag. Maybe that was coincidence. Maybe Claudia wanted the jury to remember elegance instead of evidence. Her hair was smooth, her posture straight, her face pale but composed. She looked back once as Annie entered. There was no smile this time. Victor sat behind the prosecutor's table, 2 rows ahead of Annie. He turned, saw her, and gave a small nod. Not ownership, not performance, just acknowledgement. Annie nodded back. The prosecutor opened with the facts. A rare blue diamond. A 5-minute window. A false accusation. A hidden compartment. A perfume trail. Debt. Messages. A dog's reaction. The words sounded almost simple in legal order, cleaner than the night itself had been. Annie wondered if justice always had to make pain neat before it could use it. Claudia's attorney stood and spoke of confusion, panic, emotional distress, and a woman overwhelmed by pressure. He said Claudia had never intended harm. He said the bag was a gift with features she had not understood. He said the police rushed judgment because Victor Harrington needed someone to blame after public embarrassment. Mrs. Alvarez leaned close to Samuel and whispered, "That man could make a snake sound misunderstood." Samuel whispered back, "Hush before the judge hears you." The first witnesses were officers, security staff, and the auction house representative. Then came the forensic specialist, who explained the hidden compartment. Claudia's fingerprints on the interior clasp, the fibers from the velvet tray inside the pouch, and the perfume residue near the tray. The defense tried to make each point uncertain. Could fibers transfer by accident? Could perfume linger from another visit? Could someone else touch the bag? The specialist answered calmly. Again and again. Possible was not the same as likely. Then Samuel testified. He walked to the stand with his shoulders squared, took the oath, and gave his name in a voice that filled the room. The prosecutor asked, "Mr. Brooks, how long have you worked security at Harrington Estate?" 17 years. "And how would you describe Rex?" "Smarter than most of us, better mannered than some." A few jurors smiled. Samuel explained that Rex was trained, obedient, and not aggressive without cause. He described Annie's arrival at the estate, her work habits, and how Rex had taken to her. He described Claudia's accusation and the dog's refusal to leave the bag alone. The defense attorney stood. "Mr. Brooks, you recommended Miss Carter for the job, correct?" "I did. So you had a personal interest in her being innocent." Samuel looked at him. "No, sir. I had a personal interest in the truth. It happened to favor her." The attorney tried again. "You felt protective of her." "I did. Could that have affected what you saw?" Samuel leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Protecting someone doesn't make you blind. Sometimes it makes you look harder." Annie felt Mrs. Alvarez squeeze her hand. Victor testified after lunch. His voice was steady, but Annie saw the strain in his hands. He confirmed the timeline, the 5 minutes away from the office, Claudia's changing story, and his own command for Rex to release the bag. The prosecutor asked, "Did Rex usually obey you?" "Always." "And that night?" "He did not." "Why was that significant to you?" Victor took a breath. "Because Rex had never refused a command unless he believed there was danger or something I had failed to understand." The prosecutor let that sit, then asked, Did you initially suspect Miss Carter? Victor looked down. Yes. Why? The courtroom seemed to tighten around the answer. Victor did not hide from it. Because she was new. Because she was near the room. Because Claudia gave me a story that fit my fear. And because I allowed Annie Carter's poverty and race to make that story easier for me to believe. No one moved. Claudia stared at the table. The defense attorney objected, saying the answer was prejudicial. The judge overruled in part and instructed the jury to consider it only as it related to Victor's state of mind. Annie barely heard the legal words. She heard only that Victor had said it under oath. Not at a podium, not for cameras. In court, then it was Annie's turn. Her legs felt unsteady when she stood, but Samuel's words stayed with her. Tell it slow. She took the oath and sat. The courtroom looked larger from the witness stand. Faces blurred together at first. Then she found Mrs. Alvarez. Samuel. Detective Harris. Rex was not allowed inside, but Annie pictured him by the courthouse steps with Dr. Mason, sitting like a judge in fur. The prosecutor's voice was gentle. Please state your name. Annie Carter. How old are you? 18. Where were you working on the day the Ocean Heart went missing? Harrington Estate. I was a seasonal assistant with the landscaping team. She told it from the beginning. The morning walk with Rex. The diamond on the velvet tray. The black rose perfume. The ladder at the balcony. Victor leaving for 5 minutes. Claudia's accusation. The words that had made the room turn against her. The handcuffs. Rex in the bag. Her voice shook once when she repeated Claudia's insult, but it did not break. The prosecutor asked, "Why did you ask them to check the bag?" Annie looked at the jury. Because everyone had checked me. My apron, my pockets, my lunch bag, my story. But Rex kept looking at Mrs. Whitmore's bag. I knew he wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to hold on to something. And what did you believe he smelled? The diamond. The velvet tray. Maybe the perfume. I don't know exactly. I just knew he knew something we didn't. The prosecutor nodded. How did it feel to be accused? The defense objected. The judge allowed a limited answer. Annie swallowed. It felt like the room decided who I was before I opened my mouth. The prosecutor sat down. Claudia's attorney rose slowly. Miss Carter, he said, you understand Mrs. Whitmore was under extreme stress that evening. Annie said nothing, waiting for a question. Would you agree emotions were high? Yes. Would you agree that people say unfortunate things under pressure? Yes. So it is possible Mrs. Whitmore's words sounded harsher to you because you were upset? Annie looked at him. No, they sounded harsh because they were harsh. A juror looked down to hide a reaction. The attorney adjusted his glasses. You benefited from this incident, did you not? Annie blinked. Benefited? You received employment, financial assistance, public attention, perhaps even sympathy. Mrs. Alvarez inhaled sharply behind her. Annie felt heat rise in her face. But she remembered to breathe. I received those things after someone tried to ruin my life. I would rather have had the quiet job I came for. The attorney paused. But you did receive them? Yes. And Claudia received bail. That doesn't make her innocent. The room went still. The judge looked at Annie over his glasses, not angry, but warning. Answer only the question, Miss Carter. Yes, Your Honor. The attorney did not smile again. Closing arguments came the next day. The prosecutor held up the cream handbag and a clear evidence bag and told the jury, this case is not complicated because the defendant is elegant, and it is not uncertain because her chosen victim was poor. The diamond was found where she hid it. The lie was found where she placed it. And the truth was found because an 18-year-old girl refused to stay silent. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Annie waited in the hallway with Samuel, Mrs. Alvarez, Victor, Paul, Dr. Mason, and Rex, who had been allowed outside the courthouse but not past security. Rex lay across Annie's shoes, making it impossible for her to pace. Move, she whispered. He did not. Paul handed her a paper cup of water. He's keeping you planted. I'm not a shrub. Today you are, when the bailiff called them back. Annie felt the room tilt. She sat between Samuel and Mrs. Alvarez. Victor sat in the row ahead. Hands clasped. The jury foreperson stood, guilty on grand larceny. Guilty on obstruction, guilty on filing a false report, guilty on attempted unlawful sale of stolen property. Claudia did not scream. She closed her eyes, then opened them with a coldness Annie recognized. As deputies moved toward her, she looked back at Annie. This time, Annie did not look away. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Victor did not answer. Samuel guided Annie through the crowd, while Mrs. Alvarez told one cameraman to back up before she taught him manners. Near the steps, Rex pushed through beside Dr. Mason and pressed against Annie's legs. She knelt and hugged him. "You can stop saving me now," she whispered. Victor, standing nearby, heard her and said quietly, "Maybe he was teaching the rest of us how." Annie looked up at the courthouse, then at the people around her. The verdict did not undo the night. It did not erase the video, the fear, or the bruise left by suspicion, but it placed the truth where no one could edit it shorter. For the first time since the bag opened, Annie breathed as if the air belonged to her too. The verdict did not make Annie's life simple. It made it possible. Claudia Whitmore was taken from the courtroom in silence, and for a few days the world fed on the story, with the hunger it always had for fallen people in expensive clothes. News anchors spoke of hidden compartments and offshore buyers. Commentators praised Rex as if he had run for office and won. Strangers sent flowers to Harrington Estate, dog toys to Dr. Mason's clinic, and messages to Annie that swung between kindness and curiosity. Some apologized for believing the first video. Some wanted interviews. Some wanted pictures. A few still wanted to argue. Annie stopped reading most of it. Mrs. Alvarez approved. "The world does not need your full attention, baby. Half of it doesn't know what to do with the attention it already has." Annie returned to work 3 days after the verdict. Not because she had healed, and not because anyone asked her to. She returned because the dogwood needed watering, and because she had learned that ordinary work could carry a person through extraordinary pain. The East Garden looked different now. Not finished, better than finished, alive. The path curved instead of marching straight. Native grasses moved with the wind. Purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans had begun to lift their heads. The low ground, once soggy and useless after rain, had become a rain garden where water settled and fed what belonged there. Near the stone bench, the young dogwood stood with its leaves open, small but certain. Rex lay beneath it most mornings, as if he had personally approved the design. "You know," Paul said one afternoon, leaning on his shovel, "that dog thinks this is his garden." Annie clipped a dead stem from a coneflower. "It kind of is. He did one useful thing and now gets a memorial shade tree." "He did more than one useful thing." Paul nodded. "Fair." Victor came down the path carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He had learned not to arrive with speeches. He offered 1 cup to Annie and 1 to Paul, then looked at the dogwood. "It's growing well," he said. Annie took the coffee. "Roots are settling. That takes time." Yes, there were many conversations between them like that now. Small, careful, honest enough not to rush what had been damaged. Victor never asked if she forgave him. Annie never offered the word before she meant it. Some days she felt close to it. Other days she passed the office door and remembered his cold voice asking why she had let greed do this to her, and forgiveness moved farther away again. Victor seemed to understand. He did not demand a straight road through a crooked injury. 2 weeks after the verdict, Annie received her official enrollment packet. The university's seal sat at the top of the letter, clean and unreal. Landscape Architecture Program. Fall admission confirmed. Tuition received. She read the first line 4 times before the words made sense. Mrs. Alvarez cried harder than Annie did. "I'm not crying," the older woman said, wiping both cheeks. "My eyes are celebrating." Samuel came by after his shift with a grocery store cake that said, "Congratulations, Anne," because the bakery had run out of space and possibly spelling. "It's close enough," Samuel said. Annie laughed. "That is not my name." "Then eat the evidence." Victor did not come to the apartment. He sent a handwritten note instead, delivered by Samuel, because he knew Annie did not like men in suits appearing at her door. "Miss Carter, your future belongs to you. I am honored to have helped return a small part of what should never have been endangered. Victor Harrington." Annie read it once, then placed it in the shoebox with her parents' photograph and the old acceptance letter. Not because it fixed everything, but because it belonged to the story now. Summer came warm and busy. Annie worked mornings at the estate and took a community college drafting course in the evenings to prepare for fall. She learned software that made her want to throw the computer out a window. She learned how many ways a line could be wrong. She learned that being the oldest beginner in a room was not shameful when you had almost lost the chance to begin at all. At Harrington Estate, Victor created a new scholarship fund through the charity auction proceeds. He called Annie into the sunroom to show her the proposal. "The Annie Carter Scholarship for Landscape Futures," he said. She stared at him. "No." He blinked. "No? No. Don't put my name on it." Victor set the papers down. "May I ask why?" "Because I don't want kids applying for help under the name of a girl who got famous because someone tried to frame her. Make it about them." He listened. "What would you call it?" Annie looked out toward the garden. Rex was asleep under the dogwood, one ear twitching in a dream. "The Unseen Roots Fund," she said. "For students who have been working under the surface longer than anybody noticed." Victor repeated it quietly. "The Unseen Roots Fund. And make sure it helps with more than tuition. Books, transportation, rent, emergencies. People don't drop out only because of classes." Victor nodded. "You're right. I know." This time, he smiled. The fund launched in August. No gala. Annie insisted on a smaller community event held in the East Garden. Folding chairs were set under the trees. Lemonade, iced tea, sandwiches, and peach cobblers sat on long tables. Mrs. Alvarez came with half the apartment building. Samuel wore the same blue-striped tie from court. Paul complained about people stepping too close to the new plantings, and then secretly gave garden tours to anyone who asked. Rex wore a blue bandana that said security consultant. Dr. Mason claimed innocence. At the front of the garden, Victor spoke briefly. He welcomed the first 5 scholarship recipients. A young man who worked nights, stocking shelves, a single mother returning to school, 2 high school graduates from public housing, and a woman in her 50s who had spent 30 years caring for others and now wanted to study horticulture. Then Victor stepped back. Annie had not planned to speak, but Mrs. Alvarez had already threatened her with public disappointment, which was worse than a microphone. Annie stood near the dogwood tree. The crowd quieted. "My name is Annie Carter," she began. And this time the sentence did not shake. "A few months ago, a lot of people heard my name for the wrong reason. I was accused of stealing something valuable. But before that night, I had already been afraid of losing something valuable. My future. No one moved. I had an acceptance letter under my bed. I had bills on my table. I had grief I didn't talk about because poor people don't always have time to fall apart. I took a job trimming plants because I thought maybe work could buy me one more month of hope." She looked at Rex, then at Samuel, then at Victor. "That night taught me something I wish I had learned a gentler way. A lie can be loud. It can wear perfume. It can stand under chandeliers and speak like it owns the room. But truth has roots. It waits. It pushes. And sometimes it comes with muddy boots and a German shepherd that refuses to let go." Soft laughter moved through the garden. Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name. Annie continued. "This fund is for people who are tired but not finished. People who had to pause school, delay dreams, raise siblings, work double shifts, bury parents, start over. You are not behind because life made you carry more. You are still growing." Mrs. Alvarez pressed a napkin to her eyes. Samuel looked at the ground. Victor stood very still. Annie took a breath. "And if anyone ever makes you feel like your struggle is evidence against you, remember this. Being poor is not evidence. Being new is not evidence. Being black is not evidence. Your circumstances may explain your burden, but they do not define your character." The applause rose slowly, then fully. Annie did not shrink from it this time. She let it come and let it pass. After the event, as the sun lowered behind the estate, Annie walked alone to the dogwood. Rex followed and settled at her feet. Victor approached after a while but stopped a respectful distance away. "You changed this place," he said. Annie touched one of the leaves. "The place was ready." "I don't think it was." She looked back at the house, at the balcony where she had trimmed flowers the day everything began, at the office where the diamond had vanished, at the path where Claudia had walked believing the world would protect her lie. Then she looked at the garden. "I used to think justice meant everything got fixed," Annie said. "Now I think it means the truth gets planted where the lie tried to grow." Victor stood with that for a moment. "And forgiveness?" Annie looked at him. "That grows slower." He nodded. "I can wait." Rex sighed as if both humans were exhausting. Annie laughed and knelt beside him. His muzzle had more gray now. His body moved slower, but his eyes were clear. She scratched behind his ear. "You saved my life, boy." Victor's voice came softly from behind her. "He made us look. You were the one brave enough to speak." Annie did not answer right away. She watched the evening light settle over the flowers, the stone path, the young tree, the people folding chairs in the distance. Her life was not perfect. Her parents were still gone. Rent still came every month. School would be hard. Some wounds would ache when touched. But her name was hers. Her future was open. And beneath the dogwood, with Rex leaning against her and the garden breathing around them, Annie Carter finally believed that what had almost been stolen from her had not only been returned, it had begun to grow. The lesson of Annie's story is that truth should never depend on a person's wealth, skin color, job title, or place in society. Too often, the weakest person in the room is judged first, while the powerful are protected by appearance and reputation. Annie reminds us that poverty is not evidence, silence is not guilt, and dignity belongs to everyone. The story also shows that loyalty is not standing beside power, but standing beside what is right. Sometimes justice begins with one trembling voice brave enough to say, "Please look again." This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.